Chapter 294. Guangbei was right, but also wrong. What was wrong was that there were no Dharma Meridian cultivators ambushing them along the way. What was right was that they were too late when they arrived at the mountain lake where the Mountain Kui tribe gathered. Most of the mountain tribes gathered around the lake because water was the most basic requirement for human survival. This was not a plain, so there was no way to dig a well. When they arrived, there was a large group of cultivators surrounding the mountain lake, watching one of the Taoists cast a spell to summon rain. Rain was the most basic skill of a cultivator in the eyes of mortals. Summoning the wind and rain, summoning thunder and lightning seemed to be the label of a cultivator, but in reality, a large natural phenomenon like this was not something an ordinary foundation establishment cultivator could perform. Perhaps it would be easy for a Yuanian cultivator, but for a foundation establishment cultivator, their magic power was limited and they did not have the Tao realm. They were complete amateurs to the profound Taoist principles of the five elements, and yin and yang. How could they gather clouds and rain? The current situation was caused by the use of a large-scale forbidden talisman due to the dense clouds in the sky. Even so, it was not something that a tribal cultivator could do, because this kind of talisman was very precious, but it was useless in battle. Therefore, only the spiritual cultivators of a few top sects would have this kind of thing that required a lot of effort to perform. It was obvious that it was the Dharma Meridian cultivator on the other side of Wolf Ridge. Unfortunately, the swordsmen did not have any good countermeasures. It would be best if they could stop the clouds and rain with a wave of their sleeves, but which swordsman would practice such a flashy method? They could only send out flying swords with a wave of their sleeves. In this aspect, they were indeed inferior to the Dharma Meridian cultivators. Since it could not be broken, it would not be good for them to stay in the rain, right? Therefore, they could only hover in the air beside the clouds and act like the god of thunder and goddess of lightning. They had discovered the Dharma cultivators below, and the Dharma cultivators had also discovered the swordsmen in the sky. However, they pretended not to notice and continued to fiddle with the clouds. They knew that the swordsmen could not do this. This was one of the swordsmen's weaknesses. Since they had grasped it, of course they had to put on a show. An hour later, the clouds stopped and the rain dispersed. Only then did one of the spell cultivators below laugh loudly and say, "I Wishang brought the rain of spring to the mountain Pishio people. I wonder what Xianyuan brought them." Guangbei smiled as usual. "You should be asking me if Xianyuan will bring them anything, not what he will bring." The spell cultivator said in surprise, "Oh, fellow Taoist, this is the first time I've heard something like that. So, will Xianyuan bring anything to the Mountain Kui race?" Guangbei led everyone to descend slowly and said casually, "We will not bring about war. It would not bring about slaughter. Was it not enough? Fellow Taoist, this rain is indeed delightful. However, it will rain tomorrow if it rains today. What changes will there be in the amount of rain?" He was deceiving himself and others. How dare he say that he was helping the people by asking for the merit of the heavenly Tao? If you have the ability to move the rain clouds from outside the Wolf's Ridge, then it can be considered as benefiting the world, right? The Taoist sneered. "That's not true. If this cloud was here today, would it still be here tomorrow? On the perilous peak, the wind and clouds change constantly. Do you know which clouds are raining and which ones are not? With my supreme ability to urge the rain, as long as a cloud passes by, it will not be able to leave. Within 100 miles, there will be no more worries of drought. How can it not be considered as benefiting the world?" The two of them bickered with words until the 4 people from Xuanyuan's side landed on the ground and faced the Dharma cultivator on the opposite side. Both sides were at daggers drawn, and the atmosphere was extremely tense. "I, Wishang, came here first. Fellow Taoist Xianyuan, please leave. Otherwise, I'm afraid you won't be able to bear the wrath of Wishang." The Dharma cultivator in the lead threatened. "Wishang can come, but Xianyuan can't? As long as there is no draft agreement, the Mountain Kui race has the right to choose. Even if there is a draft agreement, can't a swordsman land here?" Above the 5th ring, search for me and see if there is a place that Xian Yuan's swordsman doesn't dare to go. This was also the first time Lu Shui had seen Guang Bei's way of doing things. He was a completely different person when it came to his own people and when it came to the outside world. I am Wushang Taoist, what do you want? I am Xian Yuan Guang Bei. Fair competition, use your methods. A haggard old man stepped in between them and shook his hand repeatedly. This was the leader of the Mountain Kui race, and he was currently in an awkward situation where it was inappropriate for his daughter to remarry. Fellow Taoists, can you allow this old man to say something? If you have a grudge against each other, whether you live or die outside, the Mountain Kui race can't control you. However, since you are on the territory of the Mountain Kui race, you have to give us face. You can't just kill randomly. If that's the case, the Mountain Kui race might as well remain neutral. Seeing that there was no further action from either side, the old man sighed. There has to be a rule, right? Be it literature or martial arts, even if you want to fight, there has to be a rule first, right? The Mountain Kui lake is narrow and can't withstand your torment. Why don't we all sit down and set a rule, then we can talk about other things. Thus, everyone sat down and tried to find a solution. Actually, there was no good way. A battle between scholars was a battle of poetry and literature. A battle between martial artists was a battle of swords. A battle between drunkards was a battle of drinking and drinking. A battle between beauties was a battle of beauty. Since they were all cultivators, there was no need to go into detail about how to determine who was better. The Supreme Tao sect was one of the few large sects on the Fifth Ring continent that could be compared to Xian Yuan. In terms of background and numbers, they even surpassed Xian Yuan by quite a bit. They were also one of the few forces on the Fifth Ring continent that dared to go head-to-head with Xian Yuan. Lu Xiaoyi had come into contact with a few Supreme Tao cultivators and had made some gains. However, this didn't mean that he could look down on the Supreme Tao cultivators. The ones in Min Province were all insignificant and nameless. If he really met someone who was slightly better, he might not be able to do anything to them. Just like the one in Maojiao town, he had won by a hair's breadth. The key problem was that his cultivation was somewhat lacking. He had only been in the sect for a short period of time. A cultivator at his level should stay in the sect and train hard, not come out to fight. Looking at the cultivators across from him, he saw that they were all brimming with energy and had the demeanor of a great clan. They were all late Foundation establishment cultivators. If he were to launch a sneak attack in front of them, he might be of some use. But if he were to face them head-on, his chances were slim. Not to mention him, even senior sister Yanqing would have a hard time. Thus, on the surface, Xian Yuan was actually at a disadvantage. This was also the reason why the Supreme Tao cultivators were willing to sit down and talk. Xuan Yuan's advantage was very high, and they weren't afraid of a group fight. Thus, if they were to fight in a melee, the leader of the swordsmen would be able to make them suffer. It was better to set a rule and rely on the strength of the whole. Chapter 295. Thus, another battle of words ensued. Both sides were very disciplined. Only Guang Bei of Xian Yuan spoke, and only Daga of Wushang spoke. The others were silent. They didn't look like cultivators, but more like soldiers. Seeing this, old clan leader Shan Kui's heart shivered. After a few rounds of anxiety, they finally came to an agreement. Both sides would win 6 rounds. The winner would continue to negotiate, and the loser would leave. Peerless had 6 people who could take turns to fight, while Xian Yuan only had 4. Therefore, 2 of them had to fight twice. Peerless also had an additional condition, which was that the 2 extra fighters had to be one of the inner and outer swords, and not one of the inner swords. The number of fights was also fixed. They had to fight from age to age. In other words, the order was fixed. Guang Bei, Yan Bo, Yan Chang, and Lu Xiaoyi. Then, Guang Bei, Yan Chang, and Lu Xiaoyi would fight. Xuan Yuan's order was fixed, and so was supreme. This rule seemed to be soldier against soldier, general against general, but it was actually disadvantageous for Xian Yuan. The 6 fights could end in a draw. If it ended in a draw, the side with the most casualties would lose. This was the rule of the 3 sides. Once they made a Tao oath, they could not go back on their words. The fight was set to begin tomorrow at 7 o'clock. At night, after enjoying the hospitality of the host, Xuanyuan's group of 4 gathered at the foot of a mountain beside a lake. Guang Bei's expression was heavy. This fight is disadvantageous for us swordsmen. I think everyone is clear about this, Yanbo judged. If it's a direct fight, we have a 90% chance of defeating them. Guang Bei nodded. That's right. Sword cultivators love group fights the most, because only in group fights can we unleash our explosive power to the greatest extent. But we can't do that because we're here to negotiate a contract, not to fight to the death. Once we take the initiative to provoke them, even if we win against Supreme, we'll lose the support of the Mountain Python tribe. They'll think that we're bullying them, and that won't be good for our mission. Yan Chang asked. Senior brother, what do you think our chances of winning are? Guang Bei said solemnly. I have full confidence in winning 2 rounds. Yanbo also has a 90% chance of winning. As for the rest, you and Little E only need to win 1 round, and we can win this bet. If we were facing other large Dharma cultivation sects, like Myriad View Sect, Chimen Duanjia, or Garan, I'm sure our chances of winning would be very high. But he was facing a supreme being. In the 5th ring, only Wushang and the 3 pure ones didn't suffer any obvious losses against Xianyuan, so there must be something going on here. Yanbo thought hard. Where is the change? Guang Bei shook his head. I don't know. There are countless peerless talents, and I only recognize a few of them. I don't know the 6 on the other side, so their background is a mystery to us. And they should be very clear about our background. I've been to a lot of places in the past few years. There's no way they don't recognize me. Little E is a new foundation establishment stage cultivator. His cultivation level and age are obvious. There's no way they can't tell. Since they're willing to settle the dispute in this way, it means that they have their own trump cards. Yanbo sneered. As long as we win what we need to win, they won't have any trump cards. Senior brother, since you and I have a guarantee for these 3 matches, we must strive to kill them. Yanbo's words were very unfriendly to the 2 external swordsmen. What he meant was that even if the external swordsmen lost all 3 matches, as long as they didn't die, they could rely on the advantage of killing to win. The swordsman was very good at killing people. There was no doubt about that. The 2 pitiful external swordsmen couldn't refute him. The problem with their combination was that the 2 external swordsmen were too weak. External swordsmen were weaker than internal swordsmen. This was a huge shortcoming. Moreover, their cultivation levels were low. One of them had been in foundation establishment for less than 50 years, while the other had only been in foundation establishment for 15 years. With these 2 shortfalls added together, their chances of winning against those supreme cultivators in the late stage of foundation establishment were really not high. Swordsmen had an advantage over Dharma cultivators, but there were many other factors to consider. For example, the other party was a disciple of a large sect, and they were all in the same cultivation level. The Supreme Tao True sect wasn't an ordinary Dharma lineage power. It was a Dharma lineage power that could resist cauldrons. The female one was female, and the young one was young. It made people speechless. However, Guang Bei was very cautious. He warned Smoky Wave. Junior brother Smoky Wave, the first variable I want to talk about is you. No matter how much Smoky Wave and Little E change, they won't be able to change much. As for you, if you're careless and lose your match, the overall situation will immediately deteriorate. Therefore, don't think about how to kill them or how to be happy. You have to ensure that you win first. Do you understand? Smoky Wave was a little unconvinced. How could he possibly have a variable? Eldest senior brother, you don't have a chance? However, he didn't dare to say this because he was very clear about eldest senior brother's strength. Eldest senior brother was one of the top 10 foundation establishment cultivators in the Inner Sword group. He was someone who could beat up other Dharma lineage elites. He was a big shot in the top 100 of the 5-ring Foundation establishment cultivators ranking list. Smoky wave and cigarette, but naturally wouldn't change much. They had originally expected to lose, so how bad could it be? Dharma cultivators' spells were very stable, but the rhythm was a little slow. If they couldn't win, they could still run away and admit defeat. Smoky Wave's face was full of hope. Senior brother, there's still one external swordsman who can fight 2 matches. Do you think? Guangbei looked at her gently, but shook his head firmly. You're not suitable. Smoky Wave felt a little wrong, but she also wanted to know why. Guangbei said softly, Junior sister, have you killed anyone since you reached Foundation establishment? Smoky Wave blushed. Not yet, mainly because I rarely go out. Guangbei asked again. What about before you reached Foundation establishment? Smoky Wave's face turned even redder. Master is strict, so... Guangbei sighed and looked at Lu Shi. How many did you kill after you reached Foundation establishment? Lu Xiaoyi was very honest. 6? 7? But they were the ones who bullied me. Guangbei laughed. Don't explain. Did you bully yourself into the underworld? I know you killed 5. Looks like you still have a secret stash. What about before you reached Foundation establishment? Lu Xiaoyi was very embarrassed. I didn't count. They were also the ones who provoked me first. Guangbei pointed at him and looked at Smoky Wave. This is the difference between you two. How can a sword talk if it doesn't drink blood? It has nothing to do with your cultivation level. He took a long breath and looked at Lu Shi. The last match, you go. But let me tell you how to fight. The 4th match, which is also your first match, I want you to lose it. The reason is very simple. Your cultivation level is not enough to support you for 2 consecutive matches. My 5th match will be very fast. Either I quickly kill my opponent, or he quickly concedes. You basically won't have time to recover in the 4th and 6th matches. So, you only have one chance to win. You can't win in the 4th match, because Wushang is a very cunning opponent. If they realize that they are going to lose the whole situation, they will use some tricks. For example, because of some accident, they will stop the match or something and drag the time out. The best way is to have the last match result, so that they can't push it. As for how you win or lose, think of your own way. Little E, do you understand? Lu Xiaoyi was speechless. This was troublesome. He was very clear that Guangbei was guarding against Smoky Wave in case he lost. At the very least, he could still win the last match, and then rely on the number of deaths to win. It was quite tiring for a match to be so troublesome to this extent. I understand. 1 loss, 1 win. Chapter 296. It was a silent night. Guangbei did not say anything, and Lu Xiaoyi acted as if nothing had happened. However, the other two were under a lot of pressure. Yan Bo was reminding him not to fail miserably, while Yan Qing was encouraging him to show everyone that women were not as good as men. Their cultivation levels were much higher than Lu Xiaoyi's. This was given to them by time, and could not be forced. However, their mentality was completely different from the other two. Some people would be very agitated, some would be very nervous, and some would be very worried. In short, there would be a certain degree of emotional fluctuation. However, there would also be a small number of people who would act as if nothing had happened. They wouldn't think too much. They wouldn't cheer themselves up, and they wouldn't worry needlessly. You could say that they were slow-witted, but you could also say that this was a rare temperament. It was hard to say which was better or worse. It was closely related to one's habits. The swordsmen were whispering, and so were the Dharma cultivators. Daka looked at everyone with a serious expression. How many years has it been since Wushang won in a competition similar to Xuanyuan's? I hope that there will be a miracle this time, and not continue to write the history of failure. Otherwise, we will be overestimating ourselves if we use this method to decide the ownership of the Mountain Kui tribe. People will say that Wushang did not learn from his mistakes. He knew that there was a difference in individual combat strength, but he still charged forward recklessly. Looking at the silent crowd, Daka analyzed. We are doing this to gain an advantage in the selection of the Mountain Kui tribe. We will defeat them in the battle that Xian Yuan is best at, and let them see that we have the ability to protect them. Furthermore, we have our advantages, and they have their shortcomings. Their shortcomings are that they have 2 swordsmen, outer swordsmen, and they are new to the Foundation establishment. If all 4 of them are inner swordsmen, the competition will be meaningless. After all, we are only one of the dozens of small teams that entered the Wolf Ridge. Not all of us are elites. Their combat strength actually lies in the 2 inner swordsmen, especially their leader, Guangbei. His nickname is Northern Light, and he is in the top 100 of the 5-ring Foundation establishment list. I have to admit that the swordsman's strength has never been underestimated. There's no one in our party who can go against him. The ranking list was not a tradition of the cultivation world. For cultivators, the true essence of cultivation was to focus on oneself and ignore fame and fortune. What was the use of fighting for first or second place in vain? If he couldn't ascend to the next realm, the so-called glory would be nothing more than a cup of yellow soil. However, there would always be bored people in this world. It was fine if they didn't have the ability, but they were bored. If those who had great ability were also bored, then they might come up with some strange things. Tens of thousands of years ago, the most amazing cultivator in the history of the 5th ring brought his friend from the distant azure sky to the 5th ring. However, his friend didn't have the same ability as him. He had to survive in the 5th ring and couldn't always rely on his connections. He had to find a foothold in the 5th ring. His friend's orthodoxy was very sloppy. He started off by playing the zither. This type of orthodoxy was very powerful before the Yuanying era. However, after the Yuanying era, his orthodoxy declined and he lacked the strength to continue. Therefore, he needed a new direction. This friend of his was a smart one. He had once heard from that amazing person that there was no ranking list in such a big cultivation world. This was not in line with the human nature of comparison. Even if one pretended to be aloof on the outside and didn't care, if you put him on the ranking list, he would still be happy. He took advantage of this point, and started to do sponsored partnerships with the ranking list. Tens of thousands of years had passed. This orthodoxy that started off by playing the zither was long gone. No one knew if it had really gone extinct, or if it had merged with other orthodoxies. However, this wasn't important. What was important was that the ranking list, which completely went against the traditions of cultivation, had survived. Furthermore, its scale of development was getting bigger and bigger, and its scope of influence was getting wider and wider. It involved all aspects of cultivation, whether it was fighting, strength, alchemy, weapon manufacturing, talisman drawing. Now, if you didn't have a place on the ranking list, you would be embarrassed to go out and say that you were a celebrity. It was very unexpected that such a thing could develop to this extent. However, since it existed, there must be a reason. The ranking list could satisfy the human vanity, arrogance, comparison, showing off, and countless other negative emotions. Naturally, it had a wide range of living conditions and was getting more and more prosperous. A long life, a boring life, a lonely soul, an empty ideal, and a surging spirit of gossip. In the end, this career was pushed higher and higher. Now, it had become the most important aspect to measure a cultivator's ability. Even the major sects had no choice but to take it seriously. It had become an important aspect to judge. Of course, this kind of thing couldn't be done accurately. There were always those who were really low-key, unknown, underestimated, and highly judged. However, it didn't matter. With the ranking list, the cultivation world was full of vitality. Young cultivators were proud of being on the ranking list, and it was also a big motivation for them to challenge themselves. This was something that the sects were happy to see. However, it didn't affect anything. When one's cultivation level increased and their state of mind reached a certain level, they would naturally become indifferent to it. Xuanyuan's Guangbei was on the ranking list, but the 6 of them weren't. This was the basis for judging their ability. But he's only one person. His use in the arena is limited. Daka was very clear-headed. The order of appearance is determined by age. Then, junior brother Wang and I should fight him. What they don't know is that among us, I'm not good at fighting. Therefore, junior brother Wang and I are destined to lose these 2 matches. The key is that we have to lose happily. We can't leave our lives here. We have to increase their bargaining chips. Daka pointed at the other 2 junior brothers. The 2 of you are the strongest in our group. You always boast that you have the ability to enter the ranking list. Then, the 2nd and 3rd matches will be the time for you to prove yourselves. If you win, we will be in an advantageous position in the competition for the Mountain Kui clan. It will also increase your individual ranking. This is where our chances of victory lie. As for the last external sword cultivator, I don't need to say it, right? If you can't even take down an external sword cultivator who has been in Foundation establishment for more than 10 years after cultivating for more than 100 years, then you won't have the qualifications to compete for supremacy in the 5 rings. It's too embarrassing. Daka was in high spirits. In the 3 external sword matches, we have the confidence to win. Therefore, a draw is the minimum. However, we have to be careful not to get killed in the match. Don't pretend to be tough guys. If you can't do it, then admit defeat and leave it to others. I will discuss with the Mountain Kui clan leader about the criteria for determining victory and defeat. He will agree. Believe me, he also doesn't want any disciple from a large sect to die in his territory. This was an almost perfect battle situation. Daka didn't think that they would lose. This didn't conform to the rules of cultivation. Chapter 297. Early in the morning, when the Xianyuan swordsmen arrived at a relatively flat plateau 100 li away from the mountain python tribe, they immediately received a notice from the mountain python tribe. The cultivators were to fight in the sky, and landing on the ground meant admitting defeat. They were not to pursue. Guangbei frowned. This kind of rule was very disadvantageous for sword cultivators. If Dharma cultivators were suspended in the air for hundreds of meters, or even tens of meters, they would be able to touch the ground with just a slight stretch of their feet. What was the point of killing techniques of sword cultivators? This is not part of the bet. The leader of the Mountain Kui tribe apologized. His attitude was very humble and his words were very honest. The deaths and injuries of both sides may seem normal to you and you may not care about it, but to a small clan like ours, it is an unbearable calamity. Things have changed with the passage of time. No matter which side remembers this matter, how should we deal with it? The Grand Elder of our tribe also agrees with this suggestion. Try to avoid casualties and leave some leeway. Please forgive us. First complaining, second asking for reinforcements. This fully demonstrated the shrewdness of the Mountain Earth tribe. In other words, the Mountain Kui tribe had Jing Dan cultivators. Don't mess around. Guangbei could not refuse. If it was somewhere else, he would have flipped the table. But now, the environment was not right. He could not let the swordsman have his way. On the plateau, it was crowded. Not only were there cultivators, but there were also many ordinary mortals. They were all reputable members of the Mountain Kui tribe and were scattered all over the plateau. Guangbei knew that this was the Mountain Kui tribe's intention. They wanted to make the cultivators on both sides hesitate and stop pursuing after landing. Otherwise, the mortals would be hurt. This was truly a flawless plan. Now that things had progressed to this stage, there seemed to be no better way than to counter each move. At 7 o'clock in the morning, both sides gathered and the battle began. The first battle, Guangbei against the Jia. Daka was suspended 1,000 feet above the ground, giving off the impression that he could fly as high as he wanted. In any case, he was just strolling on the ground, leaving Guangbei at a loss of what to do. His strength was actually much greater than his opponent's, but he had not reached the stage where he could defeat his opponent with one strike. That required the right time and place. He needed to completely crush his opponent's cultivation. Seeing that Daka's defense was impenetrable, In order to prevent this person from admitting defeat too quickly, Guang Bei's first attack was very gentle. It was completely probing. He was considering how to strike a thunderous blow after being gentle. There was only one chance, so he had to be cautious. However, he still underestimated Daka's shamelessness. It was obviously a light strike, but he felt as if he was struck by lightning. His entire body shook violently, and he directly fell to the ground. Before Guang Bei could make a second strike, he had already turned around and landed on the ground gracefully. He cupped his fists and smiled. "Fellow Taoist, it's a flying sword. I can't take it anymore. I admit defeat." The cultivators of Xianyuan all had solemn expressions, but the Dharma cultivators had smiles on their faces. The victors were not happy, and the losers were happy. The sword vein and the Dharma vein had been fighting for tens of thousands of years. They had long since passed the stage where they would suffer for their pride. They knew each other very well. In order to achieve their goals, what was a small setback and humiliation? Since they were definitely going to lose, why not win with ease and let the opponent have no place to vent his frustrations? Once a cultivator saw through this, there was no limit to how low they could go. It was useless even if you tried to provoke them. The second match, Yan Bo against Lan Qing. Lan Qing flew very low, even lower than Daka. He looked as if he was ready to land at any time. He was even more unbearable than Daka. This was an illusion. As the cultivator with the strongest combat power among the six, Lan Qing's greatest wish was to enter the top 100 of the Foundation establishment list. He believed that he had such strength, but he lacked sufficient opportunities to showcase himself. Not only did he want to win, he also wanted to kill his opponent. This was the reason why he purposely hovered at a low altitude. Yan Bo had the same thoughts as him. Swordsmen had the ability to challenge those of a higher level. Although he was not among the top swords in Xianyuan due to time constraints, he believed that he would have no problem dealing with a Dharma cultivator. The problem was, how could he kill his opponent cleanly? A Dharma cultivator was too close to the ground. If there was a slight mishap, he could land on the ground in a flash. There was not enough space to completely rely on his flying sword. His idea was to close in. Through close combat, he could trap his opponent at a low altitude and find an opportunity to kill him. This idea was not bad. There was no problem in terms of tactics, but there was a huge problem in terms of strategy. From a strategic point of view, he should disregard everything and fly higher. In any case, Xianyuan had already won one match. Senior brother Guang Bei would definitely win another one. In that case, his opponent would have no reason to give up on the second match. As long as he leaped into the air, the peerless cultivator would have no choice but to follow in order to win. In an open space, the swordsman's ability to control his sword would be able to fully display his advantage. Then, he could choose whether he wanted to be close or far. That was the correct way. Seeing Yan Bo's rapid and majestic sword momentum from the beginning, Guang Bei frowned. Lu Xie sighed. These things could not be taught, nor could they be taught. Cultivators, especially swordsmen, had extremely strong self-esteem. You could arrange opponents for them, but you could not formulate tactics for them. This was an insult to a swordsman. The sword beam was coming at him rapidly and fiercely, but Lan Qing was waiting calmly. He held a universal plate in his hand and shot out beams of light. Together with his fast and stable basic spells, he was able to keep the flying sword at bay. Unlike other cultivators who would easily have 8 to 10 magic tools to protect themselves, Lan Qing had only cultivated this one magic tool after 100 years of foundation building. What he cultivated was the path of specialization. Moreover, he did not use talismans, but directly cast spells to intercept. Although he had not reached the level of a foundational spell, he was not far from it. With the help of the Qianquan plate, his defense was impenetrable. The tense confrontation only lasted for a few breaths. Lan Qing, who was familiar with the rhythm of the flying sword, shouted in a low voice. His magic power surged, and the Qianquan plate shone brightly like a light wheel, concealing him inside. At the same time, hundreds of scattered light rays shot towards Yanbo. This was the explosive attack of the Qianquan plate. It could not be sustained, but the instantaneous attack power was astonishing. Yanbo sneered. He was waiting for this cultivator to explode. If not, it would be difficult for him to attack. His figure was like lightning, running back and forth in the air above Lan Cheng. The sword light splashing out was even more rapid than before, whether it was the speed or the frequency of the sword light. The two of them attacked and defended each other in an instant. Lan Cheng defended by blocking with brute force, while Yanbo defended by adding speed to the flying sword. Within a few breaths, neither of them could do anything to the other. However, the explosive attack of the Qianquan plate was only intermittent. After the explosion, it needed to be recharged. In the process of recharging, the flying sword shone brightly. Under the heavy pressure, Lan Cheng dropped several feet without anyone noticing. Although the movement was insignificant, he was one step closer to the ground in his original position. Was he preparing for the landing? Yanbo was faced with a choice. Under normal circumstances, he could not simply assume that his opponent was conceding because he was aware that he was no match for him. The battle had just begun, and both of their trump cards were far from being exposed. It would be unwise to make a hasty decision. In a different environment, Yanbo would continue to exert pressure to test his opponent's limits and endurance, forcing him to reveal his cards. But now, the ground was beneath his feet, and he did not have much room to test. The decision was made in an instant. Like the swordsman, Yanbo made a prompt decision to close in on his opponent. Chapter 298. Just as the Misty Wave Stalker sword was about to strike, Lan Cheng's control over the timing was flawless. He flipped the universe plate in his hand, revealing the dark side. The yang side of the cosmos plate could emit scattered light, while the yin side was used to create barriers. The Thousand Threads barrier couldn't completely block the opponent's attacks, but it could greatly reduce the opponent's speed. Yanbo's shadow sword rushed into the barrier, and his speed immediately decreased. Before he could swing his sword, Lan Cheng flipped the cosmos plate again, and hundreds of scattered light instantly shot out. The scattered light on the yang side indeed needed to store energy, but under the support of Lan Cheng's secret technique, the time needed to store energy could be reduced to the minimum. This required a large amount of magic power, but Lan Cheng had already treated this as a decisive battle. He didn't hold back at all. After losing his speed and distance advantage, Yanbo displayed the sharpest reaction of a swordsman in a critical situation. A swordsman's speed required a certain amount of distance. Only by increasing the distance could he use his speed to dodge the attacks. However, his current distance was already in an awkward situation. Even his speed couldn't guarantee that he could dodge all the attacks. Furthermore, he was still entangled by the Thousand Threads barrier. His body swayed rapidly from side to side. At this moment, the frequency of the flying sword was also at its peak. Accompanied by the explosion swordsmanship that he was good at, more than 10 sword lights shot out in a breath and exploded separately, narrowly blocking the hundreds of scattered light attacks. However, it was not over yet. Lan Cheng flipped the cosmos plate again. Quicksand barrier. The Foundation Establishment barrier was very basic, and its effect was far from being as intimidating as its name. However, against an opponent of the same level, it was enough to delay him. Yanbo had just gotten used to the Thousand Threads barrier's resistance, and his body regained a bit of flexibility. However, after changing the barrier, he immediately slowed down. Lan Cheng's expression didn't change. He flipped the cosmos plate again, and less than 100 scattered light rays shot out. Yanbo was no longer able to perfectly defend like last time. His body was pierced a few times. Fortunately, he could still control his body to avoid the most fatal injuries. However, Lan Cheng's skill wasn't so good. When he flipped the universe plate for the third time, unleashing the world of ice and releasing dozens of scattered lights, Yanbo was already powerless to defend himself and fell from the sky. This was the best opportunity to kill him, but Lan Qing knew that he had to suffer. He had flipped the heaven and earth plates 6 times, which consumed too much of his magic power in an instant. Originally, he could release 100 strands of fine light at once, but in the end, he could only release a few dozen strands of fine light. It was not that he was being merciful, but his magic power could not withstand it. According to his original plan, he estimated that he would only need to flip the universal plate 4 times, and release 2 barriers and 2 rays of light to win the battle. However, the swordsman was too resilient, and allowed him to flip the universal plate 6 times. If he wanted to attack again, his magic power would slow down by a bit. Furthermore, their current height was too close to the ground. Lan Qing was a little regretful. He shouldn't have flown so low back then. But the problem was, would the swordsman still be fooled and attack you if you flew too high? That was how battles were. Nothing was perfect. Guang Bei signaled Yan Bo and Lu Shi with his eyes and rushed to the place where Yan Bo fell. Fortunately, it wasn't too high. Otherwise, even if he didn't die from the strands of fine light, he would have fallen to his death. He quickly stuffed some pills into his mouth and protected his heart. Knowing that he wouldn't die anytime soon, he handed him over to the mountain Kuei cultivators who arrived later. Since Yanbo wouldn't die, now was not the time to treat him. There were 2 more dangerous swordsmen below. When he returned, Yanbo was already in the sky, fighting with a peerless cultivator. Throughout the battle, he didn't speak to the 2 cultivators. Any advice he gave now would be meaningless. It would only disturb their state of mind. Whether or not they could withstand such pressure would determine their future, and whether or not they could become real swordsmen. Yan Bo and his opponent were not fighting at a low altitude. Instead, they were fighting at a height of several hundred feet. Both of them wanted to defeat their opponent fair and square. The peerless cultivator fighting against her was also a magic cultivator who thought highly of himself. Perhaps he would come up with a strategy when facing an inner sword cultivator. But if his opponent was only an outer sword cultivator, and he was still so petty, wouldn't he be lacking in confidence? There was a clear gap in time between him and Yan Bo. Yan Bo had only built her foundation 40 years ago, but he had already built his foundation for more than 100 years. The difference of 60 years wasn't as simple as the difference in cultivation. There was also experience, insight, knowledge, and a spell system that could be fully polished over a long period of time. The level of an outer sword cultivator was basically equivalent to the level of a magic cultivator from a large sect, or even slightly inferior. Under such a comparison, how could he, a peerless elite magic cultivator, lose to a young Kun cultivator of the younger generation? Therefore, he rose 5,000 feet above the ground and clearly told his opponent that he wouldn't land until the victor was decided. He was 5,000 feet above the ground, so Yan Bo had no choice but to follow. Who told her to start late because she was worried about Yan Bo's injuries. When a magic cultivator from a large sect took a proper stance, all sneak attacks were useless. At the very least, they couldn't be used in the beginning. She had to first break the opponent's magic power and psychological balance. If her attacks could reach the level of Guang Bei's storm-like attacks, it wouldn't be difficult to break the opponent's balance. Unfortunately, she was far from Guang Bei's ability, so she could only clash with her opponent fair and square. This wasn't the rhythm of a swordsman, this was the rhythm of a magic cultivator. In this kind of rhythm, it was very difficult to win by surprise. They needed to first disrupt each other's rhythm and find a breakthrough point. Unfortunately, after several attempts, Smoky Chimera's attempts were all neutralized by his experienced opponent. Not only did his probing fail, but he was also at a disadvantage. They had reached the most crucial moment, and the outcome would be revealed very soon. Guang Bei and Lu Xiaoyi both saw this point. They didn't know what choice Yan Bo would make. Risking her life to create an opportunity? Yan Bo was very clear about her current situation. She knew that she had already lost her chance. Even if she risked her life, it wouldn't bode well for her. She didn't care about her life. But she cared about her companions. Although she never said it out loud, the 3 people in the small team were her family. Guangbei was like an elder, Yenbo was always pretending to be stupid, and Cigarette but was always unpredictable. She couldn't let them go. If she died here, there was still Yenbo, who was seriously injured and needed someone to take care of him. Her small team would be doomed. No matter how strong Guangbei was, he couldn't possibly lead a heavily injured person and a newcomer to fight against 6 elite magic cultivators. If they fell out with Wushang, they wouldn't even have the ability to walk out of the mountain main tribe. Therefore, she was very clear that to her now, it wasn't a matter of victory or defeat, but a matter of survival. She had to survive completely. Only then could she protect Yenbo. The 3 of them were united, and only then could she extinguish Wushang's thoughts of silencing them. As for dignity, she already knew that it was worthless in the realm of 9 palaces many years ago. Therefore, out of everyone's expectations, after a turn in her attack, her sword flashed, and she took the initiative to land on the ground. Her expression was as cold as ice, as if she wasn't talking about herself. I lost! Chapter 299. Guangbei heaved a sigh of relief. The result was terrible, but it was the worst possible result. Smokey's choice was another kind of improvement in the state of mind. The Xianyuan swordsmen did not lack fierce people who would grit their teeth and fight at such a time, but they lacked wise people who knew when to retreat and take the initiative to admit defeat. To give up one's so-called sword heart for the sake of the group, this was the true sword heart. He did not have much time to think. The peerless cultivator's tempo was very fast, and his intention was to not give the swordsman enough time to consider. Before the previous cultivator landed, the next cultivator had already leaped out. Similarly, they were at a height of 4,000 feet, and similarly, they had adopted a stance of fighting fair and square. This was their strategy. To deal with the 2 outer swordsmen of Xianyuan, they had to show their magnanimity and crush them. They did not play tricks, only open schemes. With the peerless cultivator here, who dared to fight? What a good idea! In Guangbei's heart, his junior brother was a little slow. Logically speaking, this should not be the case. He was a newbie with rich experience in killing, and was quick-witted and sharp. He should not be so foolish as to let others take the initiative. However, Guangbei's habit was to fully trust his companions. He always believed that his junior brother must have his own reasons for doing so. Lu Xiaoyu slowly flew up and stopped after a few hundred feet. He estimated the distance between them, shrugged his shoulders, and shot out a flying sword. There was a height difference of 3,000 feet between them. If they were facing diagonally, there was already a distance of 4,000 feet. Even someone as strong as Guangbei could not reach such a long distance with his flying sword. In other words, the flying sword might be able to reach, but in the later stages, it would have lost control and could not be controlled. Then, could this newbie outer swordsman be a legendary king? A heaven-defying existence? The answer was quickly revealed. When the flying sword left the sword case, it was still aggressive and full of killing intent. However, it did not fly for more than a few hundred feet before it reached its peak, and its aura began to weaken. After a few hundred feet, it lost its power, and its momentum began to sway. After a few hundred feet, anyone could see that the flying sword had lost control. Lu Xiaoyu waved his hand, and the flying sword began to reluctantly fly back. He still had to go forward, and while doing so, he cupped his fists. It's too far, I can't reach it! The flying sword finally returned, and he also landed on the ground. He walked back leisurely, not feeling that there was anything embarrassing about this at all. A Dharma cultivator shouted, "Hey, are you admitting defeat?" This is the first time I've seen a swordsman admit defeat without even trying. Xuanyuan's swordsmanship is getting worse with each generation. Although Lu Xiaoyu had lost, his mouth was not. Same here. This young master has only been in the sect for a little over 10 years, so it's understandable that my sword wind isn't that strong, right? I can't compare to your boss. I've been raised in Supreme for 100 years, but I don't see how much stronger he is than me. My senior brother's light sword strike was not much heavier than a fart, but he was actually able to shake his entire body. Could it be that he was having a seizure at that time? Both of them had taken the initiative to admit defeat, so who was more noble than the other? Lu Xiaoyi's loss was somewhat unbearable, then how strong was Daka? Those who put on airs were even more disgusting. At the very least, my senior brother managed to take one of his attacks. That's a beating. I didn't take his attack, but this young master let out a move. It's clear who's better and who's worse. My senior brother flew higher than you. I've never heard of someone who can fly higher and lower when embarrassing themselves. At least this young master knows how to fly lower so that fewer people can see. I don't have the face to show my butt in the sky. On the swordsman's side, Guang Bei was an introverted person and was not good with words. Yan Qing was a woman and could not scold. However, Lu Xiaoyi's mouth was a battle of words, and he did not fall behind in the slightest even when facing several supreme cultivators. This made the mountain Pixians laugh. This little swordsman's sword was not much, but his mouth was very good. Guang Bei sighed. This time, Xin Yuan was bound to lose. With Yan Bo's defeat, the situation changed greatly. Yan Qing protected herself, and possibly their team as well, but the situation was even worse. Lu Xiaoyi, who he originally had high hopes for, seemed to be shrewd and cunning, but in fact, he was only strong with his mouth. He was actually looking forward to this brat going against his will and winning this round, but he did not expect him to be so obedient after hearing him to this extent. He actually showed weakness without any skill. In any case, he should have fought a few rounds and deliberately revealed some flaws, so that he could use them in the next round. Could it be that in the end, he would only be able to win the 2 rounds that he participated in? Although his personal power would flourish after this battle, and even his ranking would rise a step further, he was not happy at all. He hoped that the companions by his side would be as strong as him. In his loneliness, he flew into the sky and remained silent, waiting for the next supreme cultivator to challenge him. Although he knew the possibility was not high, he really wanted to find an opportunity to fiercely vent his anger. His companions had all been defeated, and he had won like he was chewing vinegar. This feeling made him sullen, as if there was a ball of fire in his heart that could not be released. He really couldn't vent his anger. The cultivator who fought against him in the 5th round cupped his hands towards him in the air. Unexpectedly, he did not jump out and directly admitted defeat. Fellow Taoist Guang Bei, you are a figure in the top 100 of the heroes list of Foundation establishment. Your sword skills are unparalleled, and you are a hero. I know I am no match for you, so I will not go up and embarrass myself. This person spoke politely, but Guang Bei was furious when he heard this. However, he was an introverted person, and he never lost his composure in front of others. When others treated him with respect, he could only return the favor. However, the fire in his heart was already burning more and more fiercely. This was all within the Supreme Cultivator's expectations. They wanted to give the strongest internal swordsman the cold shoulder, and use all their strength to attack his companions. Therefore, as soon as this round ended, the last Supreme Cultivator immediately leaped into the air. He was also at a height of 4,000 feet, and looked down with a provocative expression. Lu Xiaoyi had just sheathed his sword, and it was his turn again. To be honest, the switching speed of the last few rounds was really too fast. How was this a battle of magical powers? It was simply a battle of wits. He muttered to himself, and no one knew what he was complaining about. He slowly rose up and passed by Guang Bei, who was descending. Guang Bei hesitated for a moment. He wanted to say something, but in the end, he did not say anything. After this battle, the morale of the team was low, and they needed to spend a lot of effort to recover. It was all his fault. He should not have fought in the arena. Lu Xiaoyi was still dawdling, and he still stopped at a height of several hundred feet. The cultivators below sneered at him. What everyone wanted to see now was his way of admitting defeat. Would it be the same boring way of pretending to release a sword and then running away? Indeed, in everyone's eyes, this little swordsman was putting on an act and releasing a sword. It was still the same flying sword, and it was still as aggressive and murderous as before. However, everyone knew that this flying sword would not fly more than 1,000 feet before it was exposed. The supreme cultivator in the air also joined in the fun. In order to humiliate Xianyuan, he did not activate any defense. Instead, he descended another 1,000 feet, and his hands were behind his back. He looked like he was waiting for someone to bow down to him. This was not completely arrogant, because as supreme cultivators, they understood Xuanyuan's swordsman too well. They knew very well where the limits of a swordsman's attack were. For a newbie like Lu Xiaoyi, his attack could not exceed 1,500 feet. That was the iron limit. Even Yanqing, who had a higher cultivation level, was only around 200 feet. Therefore, even though he had descended a little, the distance between them was still around 250 feet. It was absolutely safe. Since it was absolutely safe, why not put on an act and show the grace of a great sect? As expected, the flying sword was the same as before. After 500 feet, its aura weakened. After 1,000 feet, it was a little crooked. After 1,500 feet, the flying sword was already showing signs of falling uncontrollably. Chapter 300. Everything was within everyone's expectations. The next step would be for the little swordsman to land on the ground and show off his glib tongue, right? At this moment, the flying sword was less than 1,000 feet away from the peerless cultivator. The momentum of the sword had already slowed down, and there was no other choice but to fall. The cultivator let down his last bit of vigilance and looked at the little swordsman. As expected, the little swordsman began to slowly float down, the exact same method, no novelty at all. Everyone thought that the battle was over, and that all that was left was to admit defeat or land on the ground. But no one noticed that the flying sword, for seasons, paused for a moment before rising up and shooting out like a venomous snake. In that instant, the terrifying sound of the sword filled the air, and killing intent filled the air. There was no turning back. "Junior brother, be careful!" The people below only had time to shout this sentence, but it was already meaningless. By the time they shouted the last word, the flying sword had already taken effect. How long would it take for a flying sword to travel less than 1,000 feet? In theory, it shouldn't take more than 2 breaths, depending on the cultivator's cultivation and sword technique. Lu Xiaoyi's 4 seasons was currently a 9-layered flying sword, and the speed sword formation had 5 layers. This was already completely within the category of a speed-type flying sword. In addition to the support of the sword's spirit, the uneven fulcrum allowed this sword to exceed the theoretical value under normal circumstances, reaching a height that a swordsman might not be able to achieve even after hundreds of years of sword practice. In just a breath's time, the flying sword was about to reach him, but the spell cultivator only had time to erect the most basic protective aura shield. He had just taken out his magic tool, talismans were still in his storage ring, and his defensive spell had yet to form. Everything was too late. The flying sword was extremely precise, and it pierced right through his forehead and came out of his brain. A bright red flower of blood exploded in the air. At the same time, Lu Xiaoyi pulled himself up. He had to make it seem like he was receiving the flying sword. He had to make people think that he had only used a secret technique, and that he didn't have the ability to attack from a distance. It wasn't good for him to be too high profile now, and he had to conceal himself. When he approached, the spell cultivator's blood exploded in the air. He still felt nauseous for no reason, and needed to eat something to suppress his nausea. Amidst the exclamations, several figures flew into the air at the same time. This was the natural reaction of magic cultivators who had lost their companions. But if you don't take precautions, this reaction may evolve into a different outcome. However, there was a figure that was faster than everyone else. It was a flash of sword light. Guanbei, who was in the flash of sword light, was laughing loudly. After a long period of depression and sudden release, he, who had always paid attention to his appearance, lost his composure. His face twisted in extreme pleasure. What? Not admitting defeat? Fine, 5 against 3. Today, we will fight to the death here. Whoever leaves halfway will be the demonic beast's pet. Smoky silently came to Yen Bo's side. This was her duty. She had been dealt a blow. It was clearly an outcome of certain defeat, but now it had miraculously reversed, and the reason was that shocking sword strike. She admitted that she could not unleash such a sword strike, but at the same time, she believed that this strike was probably an overdraft of her strength, and she could not continue. Even so, it was already very impressive. This was a sword formed by the combination of various schemes, a sword that could not be replicated. It was an effect that could only be achieved by the close cooperation of a swordsman and a Dharma cultivator. Countless coincidences turned into an inevitability. Was this the reason why she had killed before? Senior brother Guangbei was right. It was impossible for her to unleash such a sword strike. It was too strange, too sinister, too unpredictable. In the end, the Dharma cultivator did not choose to turn hostile. This was a normal and rational choice. It was embarrassing now, but if they turned hostile and engaged in a chaotic battle, it would be embarrassing for the Supreme. If they did not abide by the terms of the bet, even the Supreme would not forgive them. They did not speak harshly, nor did they swear an oath. The few Supreme cultivators carried the corpses of their companions and left hurriedly. However, each of them would pass by Lu Xiaoyi, who was eating sugar-coated haws, and give him a deep look. Lu Xiaoyi was very innocent. It's not my fault. He was stupid. He came up of his own accord. How could he be so stupid? It doesn't make sense. Clan leader Shan Kui walked over and said respectfully, 4 against 6, and you still managed to win. Xuan Yuan's reputation for being good at fighting is well deserved. Martial uncle told me that the Shan Kui clan will join the Western region's cultivation world. This was an inevitable choice for the Shan Kui clan. If they remained neutral, they would offend both sides. What good would that do? Therefore, if they left the Supreme, they would have to choose Xian Yuan. Even if they were more inclined towards the Dharma lineage, after seeing Xuan Yuan's true strength, they had no choice but to submit to reality. This battle wasn't as simple as 4 against 6. Among the 4 swordsmen from Xian Yuan, 2 were external swordsmen, and 1 was even a newcomer to the foundation establishment stage. Even so, they could not win. They did not even have the courage to turn hostile after the battle. This made the Shan Kui clan realize that in the cultivation world, strength was everything. The rest of the contract went smoothly. Without any disturbances, and with the demonstration of strength, it would be strange if it did not go smoothly. At night, in the wooden house, Lu Xiaoyi and Smoky Puppet watched as Guangbei treated Yen Bo. They were both amateurs in this aspect. Lu Xiaoyi could not do it, and neither could Smoky Puppet. Guangbei's treatment was heavy. In his words, this was a necessary lesson. In this battle, the 2 junior brothers and sister of the external sword sect, who had lower cultivation, had made the right choice and persevered until the end. On the contrary, it was his second senior brother, who was usually arrogant, who had dropped the ball. In Guangbei's words, it was too embarrassing for the external sword sect. Yen Bo closed his eyes and did not say a word. No one knew what he was thinking. Hopefully, he could walk out of this shadow smoothly. No one could help him with this. Guangbei also ignored him. Only Lu Xiaoyi knew what to say so that this fellow would not continue to feel ashamed and refuse to open his mouth. Among the 4 of them, there was only one bickering companion, so he could not become a mute from now on. Senior brother! Why don't we send senior brother Yen Bo to his father-in-law's Yushang clan? With his wife's care, his injuries will heal faster. This sentence was indeed effective. Yen Bo immediately said, Cigarette butt, are you trying to harm me again? I can't go to that place. I'll die of exhaustion. Everyone laughed. Guangbei snorted. Not playing dead anymore? Let's see if you still dare to raise your chin to the sky after this. Just stay here and recuperate. In a month, you will be able to move again. Escaping won't be a problem, but you might be affected in battle. Recover slowly. It won't take too long. Smokey asked. Senior brother, we still have 2 people from the High Mountain tribe in the center. Do you want to wait for a month, or do you want to send 2 people there first? Guangbei flatly refused. He was the eldest senior brother, not alone. He had to be responsible for the safety of his junior brothers and sisters. At the very least, he could not throw his life away in a meaningless place. We're not going anywhere. We'll stay here and accompany Yenbo to recuperate. As for the last 2 people from the High Mountain tribe, we won't go. When Yenbo is almost recovered, we'll go to the tribe near the western region of the Wolf Ridge. Chapter 301. They were all smart people. Guangbei's decision was very prudent and reasonable. They split up and went to the next High Mountain tribe. How many people would go? Someone had to stay behind to look after Yenbo, so only 2 people could go. Under the premise that the supreme cultivators had already begun to move, the strength of 2 people was too weak. In the end, no matter if it was the 2 who went to negotiate or the 2 who stayed behind, they would be completely uncontrollable. It was not advisable. If they stayed here for more than a month, the remaining 2 High Mountain tribe members would have already been persuaded by the supreme cultivator. If they rejected the supreme cultivator, they would also reject Xian Yuan and wholeheartedly maintain their independence. Otherwise, they would have already sided with the supreme cultivator, so there was no point in going or not. Moreover, it would increase the chances of fighting against the supreme cultivator. If there were 4 inner swords here, Guangbei would definitely go, not for the contract, but to provoke them. However, it was different now. Yenbo and Lu Xiaoyi had not reached the level he wanted. There was no need to waste these 2 good outer sword seedlings on fighting Qi. Lu Xiaoyi did not know what Yenbo was thinking, but he fully supported his senior brother's decision. He was a little arrogant in this battle and his mouth was a little foul. He was probably already on someone's revenge list. With his temper, it was better to avoid trouble. It would be best for everyone to go back to the dome and hide for a while. The matter was settled. Lu Xiaoyi still pretended to be concerned. Senior brother Yenbo, senior brother is so careless. Do you want me to find a gentler female mountain Pishio cultivator to take care of you? With senior brother's peerless beauty, you might even get a Dao companion. Yenbo is famous for his beauty. Every clan has a mother-in-law. It's also a good story. Yenbo said. Cigarette butt, I swear I won't let you live under the same sky. The days suddenly calmed down. This was Lu Xiaoyi's favorite rhythm. He began to return to his usual pace of cultivation. Every day, he practiced his sword in the mountains. It was a different feeling. So far, only the 4-seasoned sword spirit had learned the 4-6 pivot of balance. However, after one strike, he was still a little rusty and could not control it perfectly. Ju Qing was slightly worse because the time it took to become a spirit was relatively short. His goal was that when he fought with others in the future, he wouldn't need to play those tricks of the cryptic domain. He just needed to let his opponent stand still and set up a defensive formation, and he would still be able to kill his opponent in one strike. This was the true flying sword in his heart. However, he had set his target a little too high. It was as if he was looking down on all the heroes in the world. The crux of the matter was that he was lazy. Since he could not avoid a fight, then he might as well use his sword. This reason was very strange, but Lu Xiaoyi did not have any grand ambitions, so he set a small goal first. This time, he didn't use hidden fragrance because without a sword spirit, hidden fragrance couldn't spread that far. In the face of a major event, he still had to be careful. He couldn't use it indiscriminately just because he wanted to create another sword spirit. If he didn't do it well, he might lose his life. On this day, Lu Xiaoyi was wielding his sword on a mountain peak. The mountain peak was surrounded by clouds and mist, giving it a feeling of being in a fairyland. The flying sword traveled through the clouds, relying entirely on the perception of his divine sense. It had a different kind of artistic conception. Vaguely feeling that someone was approaching, Lu Xiaoyi put away his flying sword and waited quietly. Taoist Guangbei came out of the clouds and mist. He even joked, "Xiaoyi, your long-range attack almost pierced through your senior brother." Lu Xi knew he was joking. He had seen senior brother Guangbei use his sword. The frequency of the flying sword was fast and dense. It was really not something he could withstand. However, he estimated that if he had the same amount of time as Guangbei to build his foundation, he wouldn't be too bad, right? The difference in cultivation level really had a big impact on him. Guangbei came to his side and stood side by side. He didn't say much, only looking at the mountains and sea of clouds. At this time, words were superfluous. Only those who knew how to silently appreciate it could understand this artistic conception. After a long time, Guangbei invited, "Want to compete?" Lu Xiaoyi gladly accepted. The two of them each occupied a mountain peak that was 4,000 feet away. Lu Xiaoyi knew that his senior brother wanted to test his swordsmanship, which was why they stood so far away. He could reach 4,000 feet, but Guangbei could barely reach it. His maximum range of control was 3,000 feet, which was already close to the limit of the foundation establishment stage. He didn't hold back. This was a good opportunity to discover the gap between himself and a 5-ring foundation establishment cultivator. If it were anyone else, they wouldn't have given him such an opportunity. The 4 seasons were as fast as lightning, arriving in an instant. Guangbei only used his flying sword to block and block, not moving to counterattack. He wanted to test the power of his junior brother's sword and see how he could kill with one strike. With this test, he immediately felt the weight of the flying sword. It was far heavier than a newcomer in the same realm. It was even heavier than Yan Cheng, a swordsman who had built his foundation for more than 40 years. What surprised him the most was that this wasn't a one-off deal. Even at a distance of 4,000 feet, the flying sword was still perfectly controlled. It circled around, slashed, stabbed, and slashed, abnormally agile. Even someone as strong as him had to take it seriously. He didn't dare to let his guard down. The difference between the inner flying sword and the inner flying sword was that the inner flying sword's attack frequency was higher. A single flying sword was like a group of flying swords, winning by quantity. Moreover, there was no need to worry about using up all the flying swords. The outer flying sword's attack frequency was much lower. This was a shortcoming, and it couldn't be compared to the inner flying sword. However, because the outer flying sword had form and substance, it was stronger than the inner flying sword. Even a powerful inner flying sword like Guangbei couldn't cancel out the power of the 4 seasons with just one strike. It would take at least 2 or 3 strikes. He also realized that the power of the 4 seasons sword was always different. When it was strong, he would need 3 strikes to repel it. When it was weak, he would only need 2 strikes. It should be some kind of secret technique of the outer flying sword. The sword duel ended after an hour. Guangbei didn't attack. To him, Lu Xiaoyi definitely wouldn't be able to withstand it if he used his full strength. If there was no point in reducing the power, he might as well not attack. He mainly wanted to see this junior brother's true strength, not to attack him. They stood shoulder to shoulder again, Guangbei's face full of admiration. At the same cultivation level, no matter if it's the outer flying sword or the inner flying sword, no one is your match. In the outer flying sword, no one below 100 years of cultivation is your match. It's a different story for those above 100 years. You've gone to the wrong place. You should have come to my inner flying sword. Lu Xiaoyi was very embarrassed. There's no other way. The sword pill doesn't care about me. Guangbei sighed. How could he not know that basically all the outer flying swords were cultivated because they couldn't capture the sword pill? It was just that it was a pity to use this potential on the outer flying sword. When I saw you killing people, you didn't control your sword properly. Now you're handling it with ease at 400 feet. Is this for others to see? Lu Xiaoyi laughed. My sword's speed is a little scary, so it's better to hide it. Let others think that I've used a secret technique to stimulate my potential for a strike. There's no follow-up power. This way, their judgment will be wrong, and it'll be beneficial to me. Scheming! Guangbei laughed. He was very satisfied that this junior brother didn't hide anything from him. This was a form of trust. He didn't treat him as an outsider. Originally, I also thought that you had used some kind of secret technique. I wanted to advise you not to use this kind of technique to stimulate your potential in the future. It's not good for your future cultivation. But since it's like this, I'm relieved. But from what I see, junior brother, for you to have such a perverted shooting range, is it because your flying sword has given birth to a sword spirit? Chapter 302. Lu Xiaoyi was not surprised. Since he had exposed his long shooting range to Guangbei, he did not intend to keep it a secret. After 2 years of being together, he admired this senior of his. He had the demeanor of a real elder brother, and he felt very close to him. Furthermore, this kind of secret could not be kept forever unless he never fought with others. Guangbei was a master swordsman, at least in the foundation establishment stage. He could immediately feel the difference with just one touch. That's right. It's a little strange. It's hard to find the real reason for the birth of a sword spirit. It would be great if there were a few more. Guangbei laughed and shook his head. It's already a great fortune to have one, and you're still thinking of getting a batch? If that's the case, not to mention external swordsmen, even internal swordsmen would be beaten by you. I've seen your swordsmanship. I wonder what direction you've chosen for your cultivation in the future? Lu Xiaoyi knew that his senior was not trying to find out his secret, but was trying to help him come up with ideas. Of course, he was very willing. In a sense, the suggestions of internal swordsmen were even more valuable than those of his external swordsmen. My main direction should be the sword spirit. This is the most important part of my swordsmanship system. But my problem is that my communication with the sword spirit is very slow, and I can't fully utilize the sword spirit's power. This is the most troublesome part for me. Guangbei nodded and encouraged him to continue. In terms of pure swordsmanship, I feel that the external swordsmanship will never be able to reach the level of the internal swordsmanship. It's all-encompassing, ultra-high frequency, and concentrated attacks. Therefore, I want to increase the power of a single attack, and strive to break through the defense with one attack. I don't know if this direction is right. My cultivation is a shortcoming, and I can only wait for a while. I can't wait any longer. Guangbei closed his eyes and pondered. After a long time, he said, I can't tell you the details. After all, I'm not an external swordsman. If I go into too much detail, it might affect your judgment. But in terms of 2 aspects, as someone who's more than 100 years older than you, I have some experience. First, your judgment on the sword spirit is not bad. For a swordsman, the human body is strong but the spirit is weak, and cannot fully utilize the power of the sword. The human body is weak but the spirit is strong, and it will be out of control. Therefore, the swordsman and the sword spirit should be in a state of synchronization for their entire lives. When you're cultivating, you can't forget to help the sword spirit cultivate, especially when the sword spirit is just born. It can't cultivate on its own, so the help of the master is very important. Although I don't know what's going on with the sword spirits of your external swords, in my opinion, since they're both swords, then the sword spirits of the external and internal swords should have something in common. Some of the training methods should also have something in common. It's impossible for them to be completely separated. In the inner sword fan tower, there are a few ways to train the sword spirit. Of course, the main focus is on the sword pill, but I think you should take a look. Maybe you can find something useful that can speed up the training of your sword spirit, and quickly approach your current realm. Lu Xiaoyi nodded. There's actually such a technique? If Senior Marshal Brother hadn't mentioned it, I wouldn't have noticed. But why didn't I see anything similar in the Boa Tower of the Outer Sword, but only the Inner Sword Fan Tower has it? Guangbei smiled. Of course there are external swords. It's just that you can't see it. In the Outer Sword, the sword spirit of the flying sword is at the Yuanying level, so all the similar techniques can only be seen by perfected Yuanying people. You can't come into contact with them. Even if you do come into contact with them, you can't cultivate them because all the techniques are based on the cultivator being a Yuanying person. We can't even understand those things, so how can we cultivate them? The inner sword is different. We have the sword pill and the sword spirit from the foundation establishment stage, so these techniques are also suitable for foundation establishment cultivation. It's the right path. In theory, the outer sword and the inner sword can observe each other's techniques, but this requires the approval of the elders and a certain level of status and recognition. Little junior brother, your situation in Maojian town was also not loved by the elders and uncles. I don't know how you managed to survive. Could it be because of that mouth of yours? But with your strength, you have the qualifications. If you don't have the qualifications, then no one in the outer sword has the qualifications. I have some connections in the inner sword and can be considered to have some say. After returning to Cheongding, come find me and I'll take you to Fan Lu. It's not a difficult matter. Lu Xiaoyi was overjoyed. Although his mouth was sinister, it was useful when scolding others, but it was a little stupid when it came to flattery. Moreover, he didn't think that someone like his senior brother who helped him could be repaid with words. Guangbei snorted. Pay attention. Without any warning, a ray of light flashed above his head and he felt a murderous aura. In an instant, a several zhang thick bluestone 300 zhang away was cut in half. He could barely achieve this with Juqing, but the problem was that senior brother Guangbei was an inner sword. The inner sword was inferior to the outer sword in terms of power. This could be seen from the fact that senior brother needed 2 or 3 strikes to force back his 4 seasons. But why was senior brother's strike so sharp? With such sharp penetration, coupled with the high frequency of strikes, how could others block it? Did you see it clearly? What did you feel? Guangbei asked. Lu Xiaoyi pondered carefully. It seems like senior brother used a power that doesn't really belong to you? Guangbei nodded and exhaled. Yes. I used a power that doesn't belong to me, but I can control it. This involves the second point that you're worried about, the problem of the flying sword's power. The power of a flying sword depends on many aspects, such as the sword's spirit, speed, experience, proficiency, swordsmanship, sword formation, material, etc. But the most basic is still cultivation. But cultivation can't be achieved quickly, and shouldn't be pursued quickly. What I showed you just now is only the tip of the iceberg. It involves influencing flying swords, or even all orthodoxies, whether it's the power of swords or spells. As a cultivator's realm increases, this direction will become more and more important, and that is, the higher the level of a cultivator. Force. Force. Lu Xiaoyi suddenly understood. This was a brand new door that was slowly being pushed open in front of him. Guangbei was in high spirits. Everything in the world has force. There are no living things. Mountains have mountain force, water has water force, wind has wind force, clouds have cloud force, power has power, men have power too. Since that's the case, the flying sword naturally has force too. Where does force come from? Not only from oneself, but also from borrowing the force of heaven and earth. Our realms are low now, and we may only be able to draw from the stones and scenery around us. When our realms are higher, it may be a world of its own. When we reach that unspeakable realm, the universe and stars, all of them are places to draw from force. My strike just now drew from the 3 forces, the mountain force of high peaks, the wind force of going against the wind, and the force of venting the pent-up frustration in the heart. Borrowing the force of the 3 forces, one strike was several times the power. This is just the tip of the iceberg, and it has great potential in the future. It's an essential part of all cultivators who want to be above others. It can't be underestimated. Chapter 303. P.S. In August, Old Sloth would update at least 10,000 times a day, so he should be able to gather enough monthly tickets. Seeing that the end of the month is approaching, that thing won't produce any offspring, and will expire. Therefore, I ask my friends to see if there are any tickets in your hands to help Old Sloth. Lu Xiaoyi's heart surged as he listened, but he was more concerned about where he could obtain such a technique. Obviously, Guang Bei knew what he was thinking. Regarding force, there are both external and internal swords. There aren't too many requirements regarding the realm. Of course, we can't understand force that is too complicated and profound right now. You can go to Boa Tower to look for it. It's bound to be there. When you come to Fan Tower, you can also choose a suitable technique from the internal swords related to force. This thing is even more illusory to cultivate. It doesn't have a fixed method and is more focused on understanding. In terms of mental state, how much you can achieve depends on your innate talent. Lu Xiaoyi was very curious. Senior brother, how many disciples of large sects can comprehend force? Guang Bei looked into the distance, and sighed softly. Very few. You have to know that although cultivators seem to have a long lifespan, in fact, they don't have enough time. In the first 50 years after foundation establishment, the focus is on cultivation. This is the foundation of everything. During this period, there is also the initial sculpting of swordsmanship. The internal sword needs to learn the sword's speed and frequency, which takes up a lot of time. The external sword needs to be carved into sword formations, which is also a clumsy effort. After 50 years, when you have a certain foundation in all aspects, you need to go out and gain experience, make friends, and broaden your horizons. Most importantly, at this stage, it's time to start accumulating resources. The internal sword is a bit better, but the external sword needs to be carved into sword formations. If you want to increase your strength, you have to carve more flying swords, but carving more flying swords requires a lot of resources. This cycle repeats, creating a vicious cycle. After 100 years, there is only one goal left, which is to attack the Jin Dan. This is a process that requires a lot of resources. Therefore, in the life of foundation establishment, you are always in a kind of balance between survival, improvement, resources, and the upper realm. It's very difficult to have a fixed time to comprehend some illusory things. And force is a skill that requires a lot of innate talent. It's not something that can be solved by hard work. Of course, these are the experiences of ordinary foundation establishment cultivators, with the exception of abnormal freaks. Lu Xiaoyi acted as if nothing had happened. It was as if his senior brother was not talking about him. If he could feel these things, then he should be one of those ordinary people, right? His cultivation was low, his resources were scarce, and his living environment was harsh. If not for the sword spirit's help, he would have long become a commoner. After comprehending force, one can stand out among the elites of a sect and become a true peak existence. Cultivators like you and Wushang didn't comprehend force, only that Lanqing had some clues in this regard. Your senior brother Yanbo also didn't comprehend force, otherwise he wouldn't have lost so miserably. His basic swordsmanship and cultivation are already sufficient, but he's still lacking in this aspect. That's why he hasn't been able to improve his battle prowess. He looked at Lu Xiaoyi. If you comprehend force and have a chance to stand out, you'll probably be able to fight for a spot on the 5-ring Foundation establishment ranking list. You're confident that you'll be in the top 1,000. What do you think, Xiaoyi? Lu Xiaoyi didn't care. As a bad student, he hated the so-called ranking list the most. What's the benefit? Guang Bei laughed involuntarily. There's no real benefit. The sect won't give you an extra spirit stone or care because of this. Instead, they'll give you the most difficult task. Because you're on the ranking list, you'll face more pressure than ordinary cultivators. If you want to surpass those in front, you'll have to guard against those behind you. Endless battles, even life and death. Lu Xiaoyi somewhat understood. Senior brother means that the only benefit is that you can face more challenges. Improving yourself through challenges is far better than working hard in seclusion in the sect. Guangbei nodded with a smile. At least he wasn't stupid and could see the truth. It's not up to you to decide whether you'll be on the ranking list or not. If you keep killing people like this, you'll have to be on the ranking list even if you don't want to. After saying what needed to be said, Guangbei left, leaving Lu Xiaoyi dumbfounded. Be on the 5-ring Foundation establishment ranking list? That wasn't what he wanted. He also didn't want to fight to the death with others for some empty reputation. It was meaningless and didn't conform to his style of doing things. Moreover, he didn't think that there was only one way to improve. Couldn't he continue to move up if he didn't participate in the ranking list? That wasn't necessarily the case, right? Every year, all the cultivators in the upper realm, Jin Dan and Yaning, had fought their way up the ranking list. That was only one of the methods, a method that belonged to cultivators who loved to fight. Did he, Lu Xiaoyi, love to fight? He didn't think so. He just wanted to end the battle quickly. It was that simple. Yanbo's injuries were getting better by the day. Healing was one aspect, but a cultivator's powerful self-healing ability was the most important. As long as they didn't die and were able to circulate their cultivation method, they could recover in most cases. That was unless they injured some important places, such as the mind or dantian. However, these places were also the places that cultivators protected the most. Currently, Yanbo had already begun to circulate her cultivation method on her own. Lu Xiaoyi went out to practice his sword every day, but he had to be diligent. Of the three, Yanbo was the first. She was the girl who wanted to excel. She was the one who lost points in the arena battle, while her junior brother, who was several decades younger than her, gained merit. This was something she couldn't accept. However, there were some things that couldn't be replaced by diligent study and hard work. Now, apart from suppressing Lu Xiaoyi in cultivation, she had long been surpassed in all other aspects. However, she still didn't know about this and thought that it was just an accident. However, she could faintly feel the footsteps of her junior brother chasing after her. 40 days later, after bidding farewell to the Mandrill tribe, the team set out on their journey again. Lu Xiaoyi was still the vanguard. In the beginning, everyone joked around and taught him a lesson about his cowardice. Now, they completely trusted him. There was no one in the team more suitable for this position than him. With sufficient speed and precise positioning, everyone began to fly back under his guidance. Their next target was the 12 mountain tribes near the front line of the western regions. Because of Xuanyuan's strong influence, these tribes found it hard to refuse Xianyuan. Because they didn't have the obstruction of the mountains, they could feel the heavy pressure in their hearts. Lu Xiaoyi flew very cautiously. Although Guangbei didn't say anything, this was his responsibility. After the Supreme Cultivator left, there was a possibility that he would gather people to take revenge on them. Guangbei wasn't afraid of this, and Yanbo were the same. They were even a little eager to give it a try. However, since his senior brother didn't say anything, he understood that his senior brother was the one who decided what to do next. For this reason, he chose to fly towards the last 2 central tribes for 2 days. Then, he suddenly turned around and flew back. The Wolf Ridge was too big, and a Foundation establishment cultivator's divine sense was very limited. Moreover, he flew without any pattern, so the possibility of setting up an ambush was very small. Among the people behind him, Guangbei didn't say a word. Yanbo curled her lips, and Yanbo looked a little regretful. The Supreme Cultivator definitely had more people in this area than they did, and it was very likely that there were more than 6 of them. The tactic of using numbers had always been the favorite of magic cultivators. Therefore, when encountering a Supreme Cultivator, an absolute disadvantage in terms of numbers was inevitable. Lu Xiaoyi's actions weren't without reason. 10 million people, I will go. This was only a legend. It required a specific environment and situation, and not a brainless place to drill into where there was danger. Chapter 304. It was unknown whether it was Lu Xiaoyi's caution that allowed him to avoid the traps, or that the supreme cultivators simply did not gather enough manpower, or that they did not have the intention to do so. Their journey was smooth and they returned to the side of the Wolf Ridge that was close to the western regions. The mountain tribes here were only a few thousand miles away from the western regions, and the furthest were not more than 10,000 miles away. For the Wolf Ridge that was tens of thousands of miles deep, it could be understood as the radiation range of the western regions. The reality was indeed so. Out of the 12 high mountain tribes, they went from the north to the south. Out of the 9 tribes, 7 of them chose to cooperate, and only 2 insisted on being independent. It was very normal. Those that judged the situation, there would definitely be those that were stubborn and unyielding. This was the innate nature of the aboriginals. It was only because tens of thousands of years had passed that the grudges had long faded. Otherwise, none of the tribes in the Wolf Ridge would be willing to submit. The reason why they sent these small foundational cultivators was because of the principle of voluntariness. It was to allow both sides to speak on equal terms, and not to force them. If they really used force, Jin Dan's Yuaning would attack together. Under the threat of extermination, how many people would be able to withstand it? But if they did that, they would lose their voluntariness, and there would be no end of trouble. The 10th High Mountain tribe was known as the Northern Tribe. It was the most cultured tribe among all the high mountain tribes that they had encountered. It was 5,000 miles deep into the Wolf Ridge, and belonged to the kind that was neither deep nor shallow. It had been 5 years since they left Mao Xian town. The 4 of them had gone through all kinds of experiences and conflicts, but in the end, they became the best of friends. Between cultivators, this kind of friendship was very precious. Because as their cultivation level increased, it became harder and harder for cultivators to have this kind of experience together. In terms of temperament, it became harder and harder for them to open their hearts to each other. Just from making friends to Lu Xiaoyi, it was worth it. It was much better than him staying at Mao Xian town foolishly working hard. In these 5 years, almost everyone felt homesick. The dome was their home. They could not be like the high-level cultivators who could walk for hundreds of years and still not care about their cultivation level. This was also human nature. The growth of a cultivator, the change in their temperament, was accumulated bit by bit. In the end, they would become a lonely and emotionless rock. Of course, the vast majority of people didn't even have the chance to turn into stone. They could only turn into dust and be blown away by the wind and rain. Wanbei tribe, Gaojian tribe, Shuiling tribe. Only 3 more. Little E, fly faster. Did you not eat enough? Yan Bo urged him from behind. His personality wasn't like this. Instead, he should always have a loser's appearance. He raised his chin slightly and looked up at the sky. However, this appearance of his was also the target of the other 3 in the team. Therefore, although he still acted the same way to outsiders, he no longer pretended to be in the team. In terms of bickering, Lu Xiaoyi was not inferior to him. Senior brother Yan Bo, you're still missing one, right? Have you forgotten about the Red Dome clan so quickly? There are also beauties waiting for you to reunite. TSK, I haven't seen you in 5 years. You're so hungry and thirsty. Do you want me to hunt a blue sheep to nourish you? Smokey snorted. She had long been immune to these 2 people's boredom. It was Guang Bei who joined in the fun, which was rare. Little E, you don't understand. The blue sheep couldn't do it. I need the mountain ant wine. Wang Bei, senior brother, this place is destined to be with you. Lu Xiaoyi originally wanted to say Gu Bei, but when the words came to his mouth, he felt that it was a little inauspicious. This feeling was very inexplicable. In the midst of chatting and laughing, the Wanbei tribe appeared in front of them. Everything went smoothly, just like most of the situations they had experienced before. The Wanbei tribe had no objection to the proposal of the Xianyuan sword sect, and they couldn't possibly oppose it, especially when they saw so many mountain ant tribe members had already surrendered. After the agreement was completed, the Wanbei tribe leader, who was dying and smelled of elixirs, came over to greet them. The atmosphere was very harmonious. During the conversation, there were hidden worries on his face, and occasionally, he would evade. Guangbei smiled and said, "What's the matter, Patriarch? Since you and I have an agreement, we should help each other and tide over the difficulties together. Why don't you say it? There are many people with wisdom. If we can't solve it, there will be someone who can. What's there to be embarrassed about?" The Patriarch laughed self-deprecatingly. "Fellow Taoists, please don't blame us. The Wanbei tribe has always been alone here. Everything needs to be solved by ourselves. Now that we have someone to rely on, we are still a little uncomfortable. I don't know how to say it, and I always feel that we have troubled others." Guangbei nodded in understanding. The tribe that was used to being alone did have such a problem, and it was not only the Wanbei tribe. Along the way, they had indeed solved some practical difficulties for several tribes. There were also some that could not be solved, and they went back to report it to the sect, and there would be superior cultivators to solve it. Habits were all cultivated. Now it was a habit of being alone. In the future, it would be a habit of reporting big and small matters to Xianyuan. Who could say which habits were good and which were bad? Everyone knew the propriety, but how many could really master it? The Patriarch coughed softly and said seriously, "The trouble of the Wanbei tribe is not far from the tribe's gathering place. There is a natural crypt there. It has been there for a long time. Anyway, it has been there since the tribe was founded. I'm afraid it has been there for at least tens of thousands of years. There are countless crypts in the Wolf Ridge, and it is not a rare thing. There are some ferocious beasts and poisonous insects that we can deal with ourselves. This crypt is unusual because it is unfathomable. After so many years, generation after generation, no one knows how deep it is. But the cultivators of the Wanbei tribe are only at the foundation establishment stage, and our ability is limited. We don't have the ability to go too deep. Anyway, there has never been any strange beasts or birds of prey that came out to hurt people, so we just let it go. After a long time, we got used to it, and no one paid attention to it. 3 years ago, a tribesman happened to pass by the crypt and heard a strange sound inside. This was the first time in tens of thousands of years. At first, we thought it was the sound of some wild beast falling in, so we didn't pay much attention to it. But later, this strange sound became more and more frequent, and it lasted for a long time. If it was just something falling in, it wouldn't have lasted for so long. So a cultivator volunteered to go down and take a look, for the sake of the tribesmen. But when he went down, there was no news. He didn't see anyone, and there was no warning, which made people suspicious. We all guessed that he had encountered something, and it pointed to disaster. A year ago, in order to find out what happened, another 2 cultivators of the foundation establishment stage went down to look for him. Because they knew it was dangerous, they were fully prepared. They had plans for all kinds of possibilities. But when they went down, they were like the previous cultivator. They didn't come back, and there was no news. They couldn't even send a warning. The Wanbei tribe was a small tribe with tens of thousands of people. Cultivators were precious, and there was one less person left. If they all died here, how could the mortals live in the future? So we had to suspend the search. Originally, for a crypt like this, it didn't matter if it was far away. Anyway, it wouldn't affect our lives. But its location was only about 10 miles away from the tribe's land, and it happened to be on the main road in and out. I'm afraid that if there is really something down there, what should we do when it comes out and hurts people on a large scale? So I've been worried for the past few years. I don't know what to do. Should I investigate? Or should I just let it be? It makes people at a loss. These small things may be nothing in the eyes of Xianyuan, but here, we are at our wits' end. Please don't laugh at us. Chapter 305. Guangbei and the other 3 had an indifferent attitude. For cultivators, exploring certain places was one of their greatest hobbies. Regardless of whether or not they found anything, it would always satisfy their curiosity. Lu Xiaoyu was a little different. He hated exploring unknown places the most, especially dark and damp places like underground caves. According to his thinking, there were only two ways to deal with this kind of thing. Either throw down explosive talismans and other similar explosive items, or simply seal the entrance. Either way was better than going down alone. This was the same way he dealt with the Dao Child incident in Spearpoint Town. Either he didn't take the initiative, or he would jump out himself and deal with it in broad daylight. Wasn't that better? But Guang Bei and the other two clearly didn't think so. This was a completely different attitude towards cultivation. They were very interested in this underground cave. Their diplomatic mission was about to be completed. In these 5 years, other than the somewhat thrilling encounter with the mountain python tribe, all other places were stagnant waters. This caused their hearts to beat wildly. Seeing that there was still something new to unearth before the end of the mission, they absolutely couldn't let it go. If they changed places, even if no one invited them, they would still have to sneak down. Lu Xiaoyu didn't stop them. In fact, with his current status in the team, he was no longer a small follower, but a member. He had the qualifications to voice his opinions, but they were only opinions. Moreover, the cluster of luck in his mind didn't change at all. This thing had already become a sore point for him. Before he reached Foundation establishment, it had appeared twice, and then there was no more activity. Apart from being able to see if others had this fragment of luck, it didn't seem to have any other use. But no matter what, no change was a good thing. Was it just an adventure? The four of them quickly arrived at the underground cave with the patriarch. It was a very hidden place behind a huge mountain rock. Under the cover of vines, it would be very difficult for non-native mountain people to find it. Yanbo moved. With a wave of his flying sword, the cave entrance was cleaned up, revealing a large hole that was several feet wide. Cold air surged up from within, and when he probed with his divine sense, there was no end to it. Guang Bei looked at the patriarch. "Patriarch, are you interested in going down to investigate?" The patriarch was a sensible person, otherwise he wouldn't be sitting in this position. He knew this was an order to leave, but it could also be a risky invitation. It all depended on how he chose. "I'm old, and I don't think I'll be able to do anything. I still have a lot of clan affairs to take care of, so I won't be participating, right?" After he finished speaking, he left on his own. In the world of fifth ring cultivators, there was a set of procedures for searching for secrets. This was done to avoid unnecessary disputes. For example, this cave was discovered by the Wangbei tribe. Of course, they had the right to take a share of it. But the key was that they had already tried and found nothing. They even lost 3 cultivators. The incident was no longer about exploring the secret, but dealing with hidden worries. The difference was huge. If there were any unexpected gains after he went down, should he get a share of it? You can't expect someone else to help you deal with the problem and still want to share the rewards with you, right? There could only be one of the two. Either you go down with us, and you will get a share, or you leave, and the harvest will have nothing to do with you. But if you solve the hidden problem in the cave, you have achieved your goal. Nothing could be accomplished without rules. Everyone knew that. Guang Bei looked at his companions with a solemn expression. "We have to go down and explore. This has nothing to do with the so-called mystic realm. Wang Bei new appendage, this is the first request. We can't disappoint them. It shows that I, Xian Yuan, am not responsible. We can't report this to the faction. We don't even dare to go in. It's not the swordsman's style to talk about the dangers inside. Let's put aside whether we can solve it or not. At least, we have to know what's inside. This could be a trap. The Wangbei tribe may or may not know. This is not the most important thing. The most important thing is to find out the truth. I'll go down first. At least I have to figure out the general structure of this cave. I won't go too deep. The limit is 100 feet. Then I'll come out and we'll discuss the next step." Lu Xiaoyi breathed a sigh of relief. Senior brother Guangbei was indeed shrewd and cautious. Even at the last stage of the mission, he didn't let down his guard. This was a rare quality. He deserved to be in the top 100 of the ranking list. He wasn't reckless and knew what to do and what to be careful of. Seeing Guangbei disappear into the cave, Yanbo explained. There are 3 rules for Inner Sword Foundation establishment. You can't go into a different space, you can't go into a narrow environment, and you can't go into unfamiliar teammates. It's not absolute. It's just a reminder. When you encounter these 3 situations, you have to consider in advance whether there are any traps. For us Foundation establishment, it's a problem whether we can come back from a different space. In history, countless swordsmen have gone missing because of this reason. Of course, it's the same for Dharma cultivators. Foundation establishment can't break through the walls of space. Even Jin Dan isn't confident. Only Yuaning can ignore the restrictions of space. I don't need to say anything about unfamiliar teammates. You can all understand. It's hard to know what's in a person's heart. I, Xian Yuan, have made many enemies in the 5th ring. I can't distinguish between the open and the hidden. I was wronged. Yanqing asked. This cave may not be a different space. We're all from the same sect. Senior brother, do you mean this is a narrow environment that's not easy to enter? Yanbo nodded. Just now, I used my divine sense to explore. The space within 1,000 feet is as narrow as the entrance of a cave. It's not convenient for one person to move around, let alone the 4 of us. The walls of the cave are all made of rock. Without a Yuaning level earth escape, it's impossible to enter. In this kind of place, the power of flying swords is limited to the extreme. Even for us inner swords, it's even worse for you outer swords. You only have the ability to wield a sword. This is a swordsman's biggest taboo. Dharma cultivators are in a much better situation than us because they're not used to moving vertically. They're like magic cannons. A fire spell is like adding wings to a tiger in this place. This is why senior brother has to be careful. Yanqing and Lu Xiaoyi nodded in agreement. They were indeed inexperienced when it came to these details. They couldn't even compare to Yanbo, let alone Guangbei. If you don't try, you'll never get experience. Your divine sense can only go down 1,000 feet? Lu Xiaoyi asked a technical question. For Foundation establishment cultivators like them, their divine sense should have a range of about 3,000 feet. It didn't make sense for it to weaken so much in the cave. Yanbo smiled bitterly. After 1,000 feet, there are continuous bends in the cave. My divine sense interferes, so I can't see clearly. This was the limitation of divine sense, or rather, the limitation of Foundation establishment cultivators' divine sense. After continuous bends in a narrow environment, not only would the strength of divine sense weaken rapidly, but it would also interfere with each other due to continuous collisions with the cave walls. It was just like the radar in his previous life that had a lot of clutter. The key point was that their current divine sense, or rather, their brain's ability to process countless information, was still too weak. They couldn't extract useful information from it, so what they saw was a blur. While they were discussing, a figure flashed at the entrance of the cave. Guangbei jumped out. Chapter 306. Guangbei's body did not have any abnormalities. It seemed that at least in this 1,000 feet, there were no accidents. Obviously more relaxed, Guangbei spoke concisely. I went down 1,000 feet, and after 3 bends I used my divine sense to explore. After the 3 bends there was a straight path of more than 5,000 feet, and then another bend. The size of the cave basically did not change, so I could not use it. It was all rock walls, and there was very little soil. Within 1,000 feet, I did not find any signs of demon beast activity, no imprints, and no aura. I also did not find any traces of human activity. My judgment is that this cave is very likely a elite geocentric cave. Of course, the specific situation can only be handled by the sect. This is not something we can investigate. Geocentric cave was a specialty of the fifth ring. As the name implied, it was a cave passage that led directly to the geocentric cave. This thing came from a very long time ago, and there were not many historical records. It was probably tens of thousands of years ago, when the domain changed owners. There was a great battle of cultivators in the depths of the geocentric cave. As a result, countless passages were created, leading the spiritual opportunity from the geocentric cave to the surface. In this sense, the geocentric cave of the fifth ring was a treasure land. However, this treasure land was forbidden to enter, for fear that someone would cause trouble in the geocentric cave and destroy the spiritual opportunity of the entire domain. Therefore, after the Great Battle, the major sects of the Fifth Ring spent a long time sealing these passages one by one. This was a very complicated task because there were countless of such passages. Fortunately, the people of the Fifth Ring were also innumerable, so after tens of thousands of years, such passages had disappeared from the three major domains of the Fifth Ring. Disappeared? It was not absolute. Even a fool knew that the top sects would definitely leave secret passages in private, so extinction was only for ordinary cultivators. Wolf Ridge was a special place, and human cultivators did not set foot in it much. The human cultivators at the beginning had sealed most of the passages after exploring it a few times, but there were definitely some that were left out occasionally. This was the source of Guangbei's guess, and it had yet to be confirmed. Everyone also relaxed. It was good to have a source. Although there might not be any gains from the mystic realm, discovering a geocentric cave was also a great merit. However, the north-gazing tribe's entrustment was still a little tricky. Should they continue investigating? Or throw it to the sect? The four of them could not seal this kind of underground cave. It was not as simple as collapsing the cave. It required a series of complicated operations. In theory, the right way to seal the underground cave was to go down to the core. This required at least yuanying. Guangbei was also a little uncertain. If we hand it over to the sect, there will definitely be Grand Master Yuanying coming to seal it. Once and for all, there will be no future trouble. It can also be considered as solving the north-gazing tribe's worries. It's just that this time will have to be delayed. Besides, we can't tell them what happened inside. The whereabouts of the three north-gazing cultivators? What was the reason? Did something come up from underground? This matter is hard to decide. Everyone speak up. I can't make the decision alone. Yenbo pondered and said, we still have 2 more clans that we haven't visited yet. Counting the time we have to go back, we still have at least 3 to 4 months before we can return home. During this period of time, no one can guarantee that something will jump out of the cave. Although nothing strange has happened for tens of thousands of years, if something coincidentally comes out after notifying us, it will be detrimental to Xuanyuan's reputation. There will be rumors that Xianyuan only knows how to control the Gaoshan tribe and not protect them. In fact, there was another way, which was to use the emergency blue bird talisman. Cultivators had various means to send messages. If it was in the plains, they only needed to use an ordinary talisman. It could be transmitted through the forces of Xianyuan in various cities in the western regions. It was the most time-saving and labor-saving method. However, this was a mountainous area. There were no cities controlled by Xianyuan in a radius of 5,000 to 6,000 miles, so this way was not possible. The blue bird talisman was Xuanyuan's most precious personal communication talisman. Because it was too complicated to make and the materials were precious, each Foundation establishment cultivator only had one talisman. It was reserved for the most urgent times. This kind of thing was obviously not urgent. It had existed for tens of thousands of years. Why would they care about this little bit of time? Yan Cheng suggested. We can also make a compromise. It's not good for us to not go down, but it's also impossible for us to go down to the bottom. It's better to go as deep as we can. Of course, it's best if we get something. If we don't find anything, it means that it's not my fault. It'll also be easier to explain to the north-gazing tribe. When Grandmaster comes and goes down from here, he'll naturally see the reason clearly. Guangbei nodded. Junior sister's idea is good. It's very reasonable. What do you think, Xiaoyi? Lu Xiaoyi sighed. It's already 3-1. How can I value it? I'll listen to everyone. This was a reserved opinion. He couldn't say it now because he didn't have any concrete doubts. He couldn't say, brothers and sisters, it's better to avoid trouble, right? Action, after all, had to be spoken with reason, not intuition. The intuition of a timid person and the intuition of a fearless person were not the same thing. Bold people saw benefits and achievements, and timid people saw dangers and what-ifs. There was no comparison. Guangbei made a decision. Okay. Let's take the depth of 6,000 feet as the standard. After 6,000 feet, regardless of whether we get anything or not, we'll leave immediately. 6,000 feet was not just a hot-headed remark. The location of the north-gazing tribe was already at the edge of the Wolf Ridge. The mountain here was far lower than the average height of 10,000 feet in the Wolf Ridge. And humans lived in the mountains. Of course, they would not find a high place, but a low, flat place with a water source to settle down. The settlement of the north-gazing tribe was about 3,000 feet above sea level. Guangbei said 6,000 feet, but in fact, it was 3,000 feet below ground level. There was a problem of spiritual pressure here. The Foundation establishment had its own limit. It was impossible to go all the way down. If the Earth's core cave was a long straight hole, if the Foundation establishment fell down, they would explode from the spiritual pressure without even reaching the Earth's core. In theory, the Foundation establishment could withstand about 5,000 feet below ground level, so Guangbei still left a surplus of 2,000 feet. Everyone agreed, and then the next question was, someone must stay at the entrance of the cave. Tell me, who wants to stay? No one said a word. Yan Bo and Yan Chang were really unwilling, and Lu Xi was pretending not to be willing. But even if they wanted to stay and hide from danger, they couldn't be so blatant, right? If they really said it, wouldn't they be laughed at by Yan Bo for a lifetime? How could they quarrel with him in the future? Guangbei was very fair. If there is a fight in the narrow cave, the inner sword has an advantage over the outer sword. Your flying sword is too big and inconvenient, so I'll make the decision. Yan Bo and I must go in. Or, junior sister, you and Xiaoyi will draw lots? Yan Chang was very unwilling. Senior brother, why don't we follow our hearts? Cigarette but must want to be lazy. It's better to avoid trouble. He's the most timid. In this case, let's just do what we want. I'll go down and he'll stay. Everyone will be happy. Yan Bo gloated and appreciated her junior sister's straightforwardness. Junior sister is right. This boy has always been timid. After 5 years of getting along with him, I can't be wrong about him. Chapter 307. P.S. Monthly ticket smash, don't stop. Guangbei waved his hand. Since we're a team, we have to treat each other fairly. We can't just do things based on our preferences. Going down requires the agreement of 4 people, not 3. Come on, long and short sticks, 1 for each hand. The long stick goes down and the short stick stays. With Guangbei's divine sense protecting them, the two of them couldn't see what was going on. Lu Xiaoyi laughed dryly and stretched out his hand. Senior sister, you go first. Smokey didn't want to take advantage of him, but considering that this kid's luck had always been strange, she would rather believe in her own luck. She stretched out her hand towards Guangbei's left hand, but suddenly stopped when she touched it. She looked at the expressionless senior brother, and suddenly changed her target, grabbing Guangbei's right hand. Guangbei sighed. Junior sister, your diversion is meaningless. He spread out his hands, the short stick in his right hand and the long stick in his left. Smokey laughed. I knew it. If you play with this kid, you'll always be the one to lose. It's the same no matter who makes the first move. Smokey was extremely depressed. Why did she change her target at the last moment? She thought she was smart, but in the end, she missed the right answer. Guangbei arranged. The cave is narrow. We can't walk side by side. We need to keep a distance. I'll be in front, Smokey is 100 feet behind, and Xiaoyi another 100 feet behind. Listen to my orders and obey them. When I say go, go. When I say go, go. When I say go, go. Don't delay the timing. Don't be so wishy-washy. The fact is, because of the narrow space, if there's a battle, two people can't fight together. They'll affect each other, and it'll be disadvantageous for them. So, don't be emotional. The others nodded. This was the right thing to do. Swordsmen needed a wide space. Maybe they could ignore this when their realm was high, but in the Foundation establishment realm, they couldn't jump freely when surrounded by rock walls. If a ball of fire came, everyone would be roasted into meat skewers. He looked at Smokey again. I'll leave the top to you. Yan Cheng had no choice but to nod. In fact, in terms of the importance of her position was much more important than Lu Xiaoyi, who was the third officer. The cave was narrow, and if someone had bad intentions and caused it to collapse, it would be very harmful to the people below. Guangbei entered the cave again. After a few breaths, Yan Bo followed. After another few breaths, Lu Xiaoyi made a face at Sister Iceberg, who was looking forward to it, and disappeared from the ground. Yan Bo was so angry that she stomped her feet. Inside the cave, the three of them maintained a distance of 1,000 feet from each other. This was a necessary precaution to prevent spells from entering the cave. 1,000 feet was a safe distance that could be used as a buffer. In the cave, it was cold and damp. It made people feel extremely uncomfortable. Only cultivators could endure this kind of environment. The walls of the cave were not smooth. Instead, they maintained the crisscrossing protrusions of the cave when it was split open. Some places were even as sharp as a knife. Guangbei's judgment was correct. This was indeed a mark left behind by the passage of time, and not a man-made creation. After going down 1,000 feet, there were 3 bends, which were twisted like hemp. They were in the shape of a spiral instead of a simple right angle. With such complicated bends, it was no wonder that the divine sense would be in chaos here. After passing the spiral bends, the cave suddenly went down. It was a strange road, so Guangbei walked very carefully. He tried to extend his divine sense as far as possible, searching for any suspicious signs. In fact, he was not very willing to take these newcomers down here to explore, but he could not resist Yan Bo and Yan Cheng's enthusiasm. The best team for an adventure was 2 or 3 best friends who were close in strength and could rely on each other. To him, he was more willing to go alone and be responsible for himself. He could come and go as he pleased and did not need to consider too many other reasons. Following intuition was the best choice. When there were too many external factors, you would find that your choice had deviated from your original intention. The other 3 were still young. Usually, it was not obvious. Only in critical moments, this lack of experience would make them make wrong judgments, which was very troublesome. After going down 5,000 feet, there was a horizontal path. It was not long, only about 100 feet. After carefully searching, they did not find anything meaningful. Then, there was a straight path, which was more than 20,000 feet deep. Guangbei stopped and carefully plowed through this path with his divine sense. He did not miss even a little bit of abnormality. At the same time, he transmitted his divine sense to Yan Bo. Pass back, keep a distance of 2,000 feet. Yan Bo muttered a little, but he still passed back honestly. Lu Xiaoyi muttered loudly. He did not dare to mutter to Guangbei, but he did not fear Yan Bo at all. Don't pass a false imperial edict. If it goes on like this, senior brother will be there, and I will not even be halfway through. Yan Bo reprimanded. Why are you so talkative? When marching, orders must be obeyed. Do you understand? Guangbei is your senior brother, and I am also your senior brother. How can we be divided into different ranks when it comes to you? Guang Bei did not pay attention to the endless bickering of the two people behind him. This might be a little undisciplined, but it might just be a different style. The distance of 20,000 feet was only a few dozen breaths outside. He walked for a full 15 minutes, not letting go of any rock wall. So far, everything was normal. This was a necessary precaution. This depth was already close to 30,000 feet. In other words, they had now reached the ground level. If they went further down, they would begin to enter the real underground. The Earth's core point did not directly go from the ground to the Earth's core. Instead, it was like the human intestines, large intestines, small intestines, and cecum. It might pass through a slightly wider space like the stomach. It twisted and turned, and even some places would go up a certain distance in the opposite direction. At this point, Guang Bei could basically be sure that this was a genuine Earth's core point. Because he felt a kind of spiritual pressure here. The deeper he went, the greater the pressure, which was very much in line with the description of the Earth's core point in the sex records. This also made him lower his vigilance against possible man-made dangers, and also ruled out the possibility of a space transfer in the mystic realm. The only thing that puzzled him now was how did the three Wang Bei cultivators disappear? Soon, he came to a depth of 50,000 feet. In front of him appeared a mezzanine type of space, like a small karst cave. He could even hear the sound of underground water flowing in it. He still cautiously probed with his divine sense first. He found that this place seemed to be a spacious space, but in fact, it was not big. The cave was several feet in diameter, and this space was no more than 10 feet. For a swordsman, it was still cramped. Dozens of feet away from the small karst cave, Guang Bei suddenly stopped. In his line of sight, the prone body of a cultivator could be faintly seen. Keep a distance of 3,000 feet. Without my request, don't come forward. Tell little E to go back to the cave entrance and be careful of accidents. In fact, so far, there was nothing unusual. A cultivator's corpse was very normal, and it was in line with the description of the Wang Bei tribe. Maybe if he went closer, he could see the other two corpses. But for some reason, Guang Bei still had an ominous feeling in his heart. He was a person on the ranking list who had experienced life and death for a long time. He had confidence in his intuition. In this kind of terrain, more people were useless. It was enough to have him below, and Yan Bo's support. One more person would not help. It was better to let Little E go up and guard the cave entrance just in case. This was the judgment of a powerhouse, and also the judgment of a competent senior brother. In an instant, he left the danger to himself, to the inner sword. This was the pride of the inner sword. For tens of thousands of years, when there was danger, the inner sword had already penetrated deep into their bones and blood. Chapter 308. Little E, senior brother wants you to go back to the cave. Yan Bo's words made Lu Xiaoyi's previous complaints come true, but he didn't argue with Yan Bo, which was rare. Just like Yan Bo's words were not nonsense, the astute him had already realized that something was wrong. Senior brothers were there, so he shouldn't worry about the things ahead. His task was to ensure everyone's retreat. Got it! He turned around and ran away, even if the narrow cave made him bruised and swollen. Bickering was one thing, but when something really happened, the two of them didn't say a word of nonsense. Yan Bo was bored to death at the cave entrance. Her bad mood didn't prevent her from completing her duty. Although the possibility was very low, she still hung over the cave entrance, letting her divine sense cover the range within her power. Soon, a strange feeling welled up in her heart, as if someone was spying on her, but she couldn't find the direction of that person. Obviously, this person was above her in terms of spiritual power. Guarding the entrance of the cave was not what she wanted, because this meant that there must be a trap in the cave below. There was not much she could do. She couldn't enter the cave to inform everyone, and she couldn't easily leave to search for this trace of uneasiness. Her only duty was to guard the cave entrance. And then pray. Time passed very slowly in torment, so slow that she complained that her senior brother was too slow down below. Didn't they agree on 6,000 feet? But she also understood that 6,000 feet in the cave and 6,000 feet outside were two different concepts. She needed to be careful, step by step. At the same time, her intuition of danger became clearer and clearer. That was because the spying had always been there, and it was slowly becoming undisguised. Her experience in fighting with people was indeed limited, but it didn't mean that she was stupid. She knew very well that the other party's intention was to create psychological pressure so that her mentality would be unbalanced, and she would be at a loss, making her make the wrong impulsive reaction. So, she didn't move. Only a flying sword lightly swam out of the sword case and slowly swam around her. Time passed quietly, but the air was full of uneasiness. Footsteps came from the grass, and gradually, an old figure appeared in sight. It was the patriarch of the North Gazing clan, who seemed to be about to die at any time. Seeing Yenbo hanging in the air, the old patriarch smiled. "Fellow Taoist Yen, this old man is here, back off! Within the range of my sword, I will not hold back." Yen Qing was unmoved, as if he did not know the person in front of him. The old patriarch continued to walk forward step by step. "What's wrong, fellow Taoist? I'm the clan leader of Wanbei. Step back. After I went back, I kept feeling that something was wrong. I found some suspicious points in the clan's history. In order to prevent any accidents, I specially came to inform you, step back. 300 years ago, when the previous clan leader was still alive, he had received a few foreign Dharma cultivators. They had also explored this cave. The old clan leader trembled slightly, but he did not stop walking. He was about to enter the cave. Smokey turned a deaf ear. When her intuition was connected to reality, nothing could change her judgment. Even if he was wrong, compared to his three close companions, a mere high mountain patriarch was nothing. The flying sword suddenly shot out, leaving no leeway behind. The moment the sword shot out, the old patriarch's back was no longer hunched, and his waist was no longer slack. With a flick of his finger, a spinning conch appeared above his head, and easily blocked the attack of the flying sword. Clearly, the power of the flying sword was not enough to shake the advantage of his cultivation artifact. Everything was going according to plan. He could not appear too early, or the people who went down would quickly return. Although he was confident in his abilities, he was unable to deal with 4 swordsmen at the same time, especially when one of them was an inner swordsman who was ranked in the top 100. And now, he was only ranked in the top 300. He could not be too late. If he was too late, the traps below would be triggered, and it would be hard to say how many could he catch. If the swordsman escaped in a hurry, he would have less time to deal with the Kun cultivator outside. The swordsmen were all wearing a layer of hypocritical benevolence, and had tender feelings for the fairer sex. Therefore, the one left behind to guard the cave would definitely be this Kun cultivator, which was also his target. This was a plan to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. It could destroy Xuanyuan's High Mountain Patriarch plan, and at the same time achieve his personal goal. He was only one person, and this was his habit. He had always believed that a true battle between cultivators relied on their brains and not brute force. Therefore, that group of fools from the Supreme Sect had been badly battered by these swordsmen, but he alone could do what the Supreme Sect's 6 people couldn't. He did not attack with all his strength, but instead gradually increased the pressure. What kind of threat could a swordsman who could only guard the cave entrance, and did not dare to move freely as if he was flying, pose? He needed to see clearly. When this Kun cultivator had no choice but to use all her strength to deal with his magic, she could no longer hide the strand of destiny in her mind. This was his true goal. For this reason, he had searched for many people in the past 10 years, and they were all cultivators who had participated in the internal and external sword battle in Xianyuan. Yan Yun was an idiot. She thought that the danger was only outside the dome, But who would have thought that she would die in her own sect, and in the famous world of 9 palaces in the 5th Ring Road? This showed the darkness of Xian Yuan. Under the surface of iron blood and unity, it was actually a mess of corruption. He had already made a plan to deal with this idiot, but he did not expect that someone would directly make a move on the dome. He had to find out who this person was. It was none other than one of the dozens of external swords. He had plenty of patience, because this acquisition would change his destiny. This Kun cultivator was also one of the external swords who had participated in the internal and external sword battle. Furthermore, he had insider information that this woman was one of the few people who had fought against Yen Yun. There was a high chance that she had a fragment of destiny. It was just that she had used some trick to make it impossible for others to see through it. Everything was going smoothly. The only doubt was, with this woman's weak skills, how did she manage to kill Yen Yun? Was it a honey trap? As he took out his instruments one after another, talismans flew and spells bombarded. Yen Qin, who was originally weaker, lost the speed that swordsmen relied on to survive. The situation took a turn for the worse, and it was collapsing far beyond his expectations. He was very disappointed. He had once again chosen the wrong target. This woman did not have a fragment of destiny. He had found the wrong person. Disheartened, he would not show mercy to a woman. Although he had not achieved his personal goal, he could still achieve his sect's goal. He would kill this woman and destroy the entrance of the cave. Let's see how many of the 3 people inside could survive. The female swordsman began to descend towards the entrance of the cave. Was she muddle-headed from all the killing? She would rather go down and be buried together with her companions than stay up there and suffer his spells? This was not the way a swordsman would act. But then again, how could a woman be a real swordsman? Perhaps there was a lover down there that she could not give up. They lived together, and died in the same cave. He admired them very much and was willing to fulfill their wishes. Chapter 309. P.S. Yesterday's monthly votes went up very fast. The sword soldier finally entered the top 50 again. Thank you for your support. Don't stop, keep on smashing. Guang Bei waited for a moment. He was giving enough time for his junior brother behind him. He was very cautious. Those who could be ranked in the top 100 were not arrogant. Those who were arrogant would not survive. This was just a subconscious precaution. He did not really discover anything, so he did not plan to leave. To be able to reach this step, besides being cautious, he was also fearless. The swordsman would not retreat without knowing what the danger was. This was a philosophy. Lu Xiaoyi did not understand this, but he did. Feeling that Yan Bo had retreated far enough, Guang Bei began to move forward again. The moment he stepped into the small karst cave, he stopped again. As far as his eyes could see, there were indeed 3 corpses. They might or might not be the 3 north-gazing clan cultivators, but that was not important. The important thing was that there were 2 other pairs of eyes in the small karst cave. They were not human eyes. The mountain owl was a rare monster with a strong sense of territory. It had copper skin and iron bones, and could tear apart tigers and bears in close combat. Its only weakness was that its spiritual power was very low. It was so low that even Guang Bei's divine sense could not detect it. Guang Bei knew that he could not move now. Whether he moved forward or backward, it would trigger the monster to go berserk. This monster's little brain was probably still wondering what had intruded into its territory. When it figured it out, it would be the moment to attack. But because it was too stupid, there was a process. As long as he moved, the monster would definitely follow its instincts. He did not move because one of the 2 mountain owls was a Jingdan beast. In the open space, he could deal with a Jingdan beast. If he could not beat it, he could still escape. But in the terrain of the cave, the advantages and disadvantages of both sides were different. He did not have much of a chance. If he moved forward, his chances were slim. If he retreated, even if he was as strong as the swordsman, he could not fly on his sword in the cave. How could he outrun a Jean Dan mountain owl that lived in the mountains? Yen Bo, back out of the cave! I'll be there soon! Yen Bo was startled and resisted. Senior brother, it's just the two of us. I can cover for you. Guang Bei took a deep breath. Calling Yen Bo over would definitely be beneficial to his escape, because the demonic beasts would have another target. However, this was not something a Xianyuan swordsman should do. He had never thought of doing this. From the moment Lu Xiaoyi left, he was the eldest senior brother. While receiving the respect of his junior brothers and sisters, he also had to shoulder his own responsibilities. This was Xuanyuan's tradition. It was the tradition of the inner sword. Go! Right away! After Guang Bei finished speaking, he no longer paid any attention to him. Instead, he took out a jade slip. Before he made his final choice, he still had some arrangements to make. Yen Bo was extremely reluctant to leave. He wanted to prove that he could shoulder some of the pressure for his senior brother. If they were outside, he would rather disobey orders than leave. However, this wasn't the place where the swordsman was fighting. Not only would he not be of any help, he might even affect his senior brother's response and distract him. Therefore, he could only retreat. He had to retreat quickly to reduce his senior brother's pressure to the greatest extent. He was somewhat depressed. How did he end up in this situation where he was in the middle of nowhere? He didn't see the danger ahead, and he didn't see the possible changes at the cave entrance behind him. He was like a rat in a bellows, suffering from both ends. Although he was depressed, he was still determined to retreat. What made him feel slightly relieved was that his senior brother didn't send any intense fluctuations of spiritual vigor. There shouldn't be too big of a problem, right? The position of the small karst cave was 50,000 feet deep. It hadn't reached the agreed depth yet. It seemed that they would stop here and wouldn't go any further. What did his senior brother discover? Was there a need to be so alarmed? After retreating to a depth of 25,000 feet, he happened to be in the middle of his companions. Suddenly, intense fluctuations of spiritual vigor came from the front and back. This meant that the battle had started one after the other. He couldn't reach both ends. Ever since he met that guy, it seemed that he had never been successful. Which side should he go? Which side should he help? This was really troublesome. Almost instantly, he made a decision. He chose to trust his senior brother. Most importantly, it was more spacious above. It could accommodate more battles. Smoky Puppet was originally hanging 1,000 feet above the cave entrance. However, she had now lowered herself to the same level as the cave entrance. This was an inconceivable choice for a swordsman. However, she did so, not because she wanted to die with the people in the cave, but because she had received a hint from someone. Just as she approached, she felt 3 killing intents rushing out from behind her. 2 were fast and 1 was slow. 2 were strong and 1 was weak. Based on her swordsman's instincts, she knew that they were 3 flying swords. Moreover, they were external swords. It went without saying who sent them. As an external swordsman, he naturally understood what was the right thing to do now. She used her trump card, the 4th flying sword. In terms of engraving flying swords and sword arrays, she had an extraordinary talent. Furthermore, she did not lack resources. Therefore, in her 40 years of foundation building, she had successfully engraved 4 full-layer flying swords. This was far more than the 2 swords of other cultivators of the same level. However, compared to Lu Xiaoyi, her flying swords lacked soul and penetrative power. Something like quantity would only change when it reached a certain level. For example, if hundreds or thousands of flying swords were shot out, the difference between 2 and 4 flying swords was not significant. However, this was not the case in the eyes of the cultivator opposite her. Initially, this woman had been fighting with 3 flying swords. However, when she was about to land, she suddenly unleashed another 3 flying swords from the sword sheath on her back. For a swordsman with such a level of cultivation to be able to control 6 flying swords, it was truly unimaginable. Could she control it with her spiritual sense? Could her magic power keep up with the consumption? Was it just for show? Yes, he did not notice Lu Xiaoyi's last flying sword, hidden fragrance. This was because the previous 3 flying swords were too ferocious and murderous. They disrupted the fluctuation of spiritual vigor in the surrounding space, causing the entire area to be in a state of chaos. 3 more flying swords came, but they didn't make him panic. Instead, they gave him hope. From his angle, he could not see that some of the flying swords did not come from Smokey's sword sheath. Instead, they climbed up the woman's thighs and revealed their true colors behind her shoulders. This was an illusion. Through the illusion of vision, the deep hole under the woman's feet, and the spiritual vigor that filled the battle space, the sword howled with murderous intent. His hope was, could it be that this woman had not fully displayed her strength? If she still had the strength to shoot out flying swords, it meant that she still had the strength to conceal the fate in her mind. He still had a chance to fulfill his wish. There were some suspicious points, but he did not have the time to distinguish them. He had to deal with this wave of attacks first. This was not a difficult task because he had already experienced the power of this woman's swords. Even if she could shoot out 100 flying swords, she would only have the advantage of numbers. In terms of the power of a single sword, there was no difference. The first flying sword was Smokey's trump card. It was not that her flying sword was very fast, but that someone was deliberately controlling its speed. The cultivator's main magic weapon, the Tuo Luo celestial artifact, suddenly shone brightly and spun even faster. It created a shadow and blocked Smokey's flying swords. The pressure on the swords made the cultivator's heart lighten. As expected, there was no difference in the penetrative power of the swords from before. Then, there were the other 2 flying swords, one in front and one behind. He had the confidence to block them. Chapter 310. 4 seasons arrived. Amidst the violent collision, the spinning top instantly lost control. This kind of power was completely incomparable to before. Sensing the danger, the spell cultivator gathered all the magic weapons flying outside in front of him, but they still couldn't withstand the pressure that was even heavier than before. 10 Strikes Decisive City was a flying sword that focused specifically on penetrating power. With the support of the sword spirit, and the 4-6 unbalanced fulcrums, the power it displayed was already far beyond normal standards. It was also at this moment that the spell cultivator finally sensed that there was still a 7th flying sword. Hidden Fragrance was an assassination sword, but it also had a limit. It couldn't pierce through a person's body without being discovered. There had to be a minimum distance to be discovered. If Hidden Fragrance had a spirit, this distance would be greatly reduced, but it couldn't be done now. There were still limitations. The spell cultivator immediately fell into despair. He had a precious death substitution talisman, but the problem was which flying sword to substitute for. It wasn't up to him to make a choice. He could only block whichever flying sword came first. Decisive City broke through all his defenses in an instant, and pierced through his heart. The substitution talisman was activated. Almost at the same time, Hidden Fragrance pierced through his chest from below his abdomen. The angle was tricky, but it still managed to pierce through his heart. Piercing through the heart didn't mean that he would die immediately. He still had a few breaths of time left. What he was most troubled about now was whether this vicious woman was the owner of the Shard of Fate. This way, at least he would know if it was worth it before he died. It wasn't a woman. Something swayed out from under the woman's skirt. It had a sunny face and a pure smile. When it appeared in front of the spell cultivator, the power of fate was strong and vigorous without any concealment. The spell cultivator immediately knew where he had gone wrong. His mistake was to target Yen Yun's external sword, which had been in the Foundation establishment stage for a few decades. He didn't care about those little swordsmen who had only been in the Foundation establishment stage for a few decades. In the moment of his death, he could sense his own karmic luck leaving him. Everything was over. Yenchen came to Lu Shui, who was licking the candied haws. She was very curious. Had little junior brother been hiding in the cave all this time? Or had he just happened to rush back? Wasn't this too much of a coincidence? But before she could say anything, Lu Xiaoyi was one step ahead of her. Senior brother Guangbei told me to come back. He seemed to feel that something was wrong. But I'm the last one. I don't know what they encountered. The two of them hurried back to the side of the cave. At this time, the faint fluctuations of spiritual vigor coming from the cave could no longer be concealed. The two of them knew that something big had happened inside. Before the two of them could react and decide what to do next, another person jumped out of the cave. It was Yen Bo, who was burning with impatience. Seeing the two of them looking at him in surprise, he couldn't help but ask, "Where is he? Who are you guys fighting?" At the same time, Smoky Ash asked, "Smoky Wave, why did you come out? Who is eldest senior brother fighting next?" Lu Xiaoyi didn't wait for him to answer. Instead, he jumped back into the cave, followed by Smoky Ash. Once again, Smoky Ash was left hanging outside. It was not that she was not alert enough, but now, she had completely understood her position. In terms of age, she might be the third, but in terms of strength, she was the fourth. Even if she tried her best, she could not defeat it, but in the hands of her little junior brother, it was just a matter of time. Although there were all kinds of borrowings, the power of the flying sword could not be faked. In the hands of her little junior brother, the spinning top celestial device that her several flying swords could not do anything to was just a matter of a sword. Until now, she still didn't know where the gap was. That reckless guy who appeared in the sword aura rushing to the sky tower with a dumbfounded face and called out her name was a coward who didn't seem like a swordsman. He was a swordsman who always put safety first. Yet, he had been crossing the bottom line of her cognition. If he wasn't a swordsman with his killing record, then what was she? Smoky Ash once again silently guarded the entrance of the cave. Soon, she shifted her attention to eldest senior brother below. It seemed that no one knew what was going on down there. Lu Xiaoyi and Smoky Ash jumped down one after the other, completely forgetting Guangbei's instructions. Lu Xi was afraid of trouble, so the way he solved the problem was even more fearless. For him, there were some things that he couldn't be afraid of. For example, Guangbei had taken care of them wholeheartedly for the past 5 years. No one should be taken care of. For Guangbei, this might be the tradition of Xuanyuan's inner sword, but for Lu Xiaoyi, this was a relationship that couldn't be ignored. When he cared, there was nothing in this world that he was afraid of. He was afraid of trouble because he didn't care. "I came out because of senior brother's orders." "Why did you come out?" "Senior sister and I are enough to deal with the two people up there." "Why did you come out? Do you think I wanted to? Wasn't it because of senior brother's orders? In the end, you caused me to lose both sides. In the future, I won't be the second brother anymore. I'll either be the eldest or the youngest. I don't want to be sandwiched in the middle." "Smoky Ash, who's the one outside?" "How would I know?" "I only know that senior sister was fighting with him up there, so I hid behind and let out a few strikes." "What happened down there?" "Smoky Ash, can't you say something? I'm the same as you." "I don't know. What the F***ck is this? You don't even know what's going on." "The next time I enter the cave, I won't practice the inner sword anymore. I'll practice the outer sword. Stay away from me. Keep a distance of 100 feet. No, keep a distance of 200 feet. Smoky Ash, do you know the rules? Don't talk to me about rules. If we really talk about rules, I'm the senior brother. You should be the one eating behind me. I'm really unlucky. How did I get to know someone like you? Ever since I met you, not a single thing has gone my way." The two of them flew down while bickering. Until now, they had never thought that something would happen to their powerful senior brother. How was that possible? Their senior brother was so powerful and meticulous. They couldn't compare to him. If nothing happened to them, their senior brother would definitely be fine too. When they descended halfway, the spiritual energy below suddenly stopped. Everything became quiet, so quiet that it made them feel uneasy. Senior brother won. Lu Xiaoyi cheered himself on. After talking for so long, that's all you can say. Smoky Ash rarely agreed. He didn't want to hear any different opinions. Many things happened, but they didn't have much time. When they stopped observing the cave walls, they passed through very quickly. After all, 50,000 feet wasn't a long distance for cultivators. Lu Xiaoyi only used a few strikes and licked a stick of sugar-coated haws. This was a swordsman's battle. It started fiercely and ended quickly. There was rarely any confusion. We've arrived at the small karst cave in front. Senior brother's last stand was there. Smoky Ash, you donkey, slow down. Lu Shi was the last to enter the small karst cave. He used the heaven-measuring sword ruler to rush forward. He maintained a posture of holding the sword in one hand, ready to attack at any time. However, everything in front of him made it impossible for him to wield his sword. Guangbei's eyes were wide open. He knelt on one knee and supported his body with a broken sword. However, he had already lost his vitality. Chapter 311. Lu Shui was stunned on the spot. Yen Bo rushed in right after. Everything in front of him made his eyes pop out of their sockets. With a roar, he rushed over and hugged Guangbei's body tightly. I regret it. I shouldn't have listened to you. Looking around, Lu Xiaoyi saw two strange human-shaped demonic beasts lying in a pool of blood. One of them was emitting an extremely strong and terrifying aura, which was not something a foundation-building demonic beast could achieve. Lu Xiaoyi understood everything now. Because it was dangerous and uncontrollable, first Lu Xiaoyi, then Yen Bo, they were all driven out of the cave by him, leaving him to face it alone. This might be the so-called tradition of Xianyuan, the tradition of the inner sword, a tradition that Lu Xiaoyi couldn't understand. He always thought that Xuanyuan's tradition was somewhat fake and empty, just a propaganda tactic. But in front of the living reality, he began to ask himself, if I were at the front, would I be able to do the same as senior brother Guangbei? Is a rice worm at the front still a rice worm? He didn't want to change, but he knew that his own philosophy and cognition were changing because of those people, those things, those tragic events, those tragic sacrifices. He couldn't ignore them. In the face of the death of a loved one, different people would have different reactions. But cultivators were relatively the most ruthless kind. Grief should be hidden in the heart, not shown on the face. When Lu Xiaoyi tried to persuade Yen Bo had already stood up, holding Guangbei's body. Tribulations could hurt people, but they could also train people. Some people couldn't recover from the setback, while others could grow from it. Senior brother Guangbei is gone. Now I'm the eldest senior brother. Lu Xiaoyi nodded, expressing his agreement. The two of them no longer spoke as intimately as before. Moreover, Lu Xiaoyi realized that they could never return to their previous state. Don't move anything here. Let's take senior brother up. Lu Xiaoyi silently led the way in front. In just a short 2 hours, they had already walked through the cave many times. Moreover, it could be expected that this would not be the last time. After leaving the cave, Smoky Ash was completely unable to accept such a result. But cultivators wouldn't cling to their fate and wouldn't randomly complain. They were more rational and were more able to face death. Lu Xiaoyi briefly told her what had happened. At the same time, Yanqing also talked about what had happened outside. When all these pieces of information were gathered together, the evidence was very strong. The only suspicious point was which orthodoxy was behind this fake patriarch. This person was not the real Wangbei clan leader. This was the reason why he looked old and senile, and his whole body was covered with the smell of elixirs. It was because this was the best way to cover it up. It had to be said that Xuanyuan's disciples were not experienced enough in some unorthodox Taoist methods. This was a Taoist who was over 100 years old. Compared to his lifespan, he was still very young. However, it was impossible to tell which orthodoxy this person belonged to from his belongings. They did not touch the storage ring because it might cause it to collapse. After listening to Smoky Ash's description of the situation outside, Yenbo did not hesitate. He had automatically taken over Guangbei's position. This was not a usurpation of power, but a responsibility. He had changed from a cool attitude to a more responsible attitude. This was a very important step in the process of becoming a patriarch. "What do you think?" Smoky Ash said hatefully. "This must be that Taoist scheme. Since he pretended to be the Wangbei clan leader, he has been leading us into a trap step by step. There are traps in the cave, and he wants to collapse the cave from the outside. It must be a supreme cultivator. They didn't chase after us, but set a trap in advance on the path we must take. There must be his accomplices among the Wangbei clan leader. Maybe some of them, maybe all of them." Yenbo looked at Lu Xi. Lu Xiaoyi nodded. "I agree with senior sister's judgment, but there are some doubts. If it's a supreme cultivator, why is there only one of them here? Supreme is not a sect that shows off individual heroes. As for what to do, I will listen to senior brother." Yenbo was not polite. Now was not the time to be polite. "My intention is to pass the Blue Bird's message and quickly pass it to the sect. There are many mysteries behind this matter. It should be decided by the sect elders. We will stay here and monitor the Wangbei clan leader's every move and intercept any possible exits." The two nodded silently. Yenbo did not hesitate. He took out his Blue Bird sword talisman and hurriedly poured his spiritual sense into it. With a wave of his hand, the talisman turned into a blue bird. With a long cry, it flew through the clouds. The three of them were smart people. They knew the reason why Yenbo did this. If they were a little impulsive and hurt Guangbei, they should immediately capture all the Wangbei clan leaders' cultivators and not let a single one escape. Then, they could find out the possible truth from among them. But this was not the way of cultivators. If Guangbei was still alive, he would not allow them to be so rash. Although Wangbei was a small clan, there were nearly 100 cultivators and more than 10 foundation establishments. The key was that they did not know the details of the Wangbei clan. They only had a vague idea of who these cultivators were and what realm they were in. If they rashly made a move, it was impossible to catch them all in one fell swoop. And with just the three of them, they might not really have the ability to do it. If they were not careful, the agreement that they had just made would immediately become smoke and the relationship would deteriorate beyond repair. Therefore, the best countermeasure now was to report it to the sect. The sect would send people to seal the Earth's core cave and investigate the truth. This was the most fundamental way to deal with it. Only when one's realm reached a certain level could they master the art of mind control. Only then could they find out the truth by checking other people's minds. But Foundation establishment cultivators could not do this at all. Even Jean Dan could barely do it. In fact, among the three of them, Yenbo was the most impulsive. They were the real Marshall brothers and came from the same branch of the internal sword. But when a person took on some kind of responsibility, his thoughts would no longer be as casual as before. Instead, he would become more responsible. This was the process of growing up. He had abandoned his anger and became more considerate. Some words could be said when you were a member of a team, but when you became a leader, you could not say it. They froze the two corpses. Guangbei, needless to say, had to be sent back to the domed sword burial ground. The strange spiritual cultivator needed the sect to identify him. Their daily task was to monitor the cultivators of the Wangbei tribe and not allow them to go out. Of course, their main task was to persuade them, not to threaten them with force. Originally, the three of them were still a little worried that if these people were disloyal and rushed out, it would put them in a very awkward situation. However, to their surprise, the north-gazing cultivators were very cooperative. They were also very curious as to how their old patriarch had become another person. Half a day later, Xuanyuan's reinforcements had not yet arrived. But after a careful search of the patriarch's residence, the cultivators of the Wanbei tribe found a corpse. It was very likely that it was the remains of the real patriarch. Although they were reluctant, the three of them had to admit that the possibility of the cultivators of the Wanbei tribe being involved was getting lower and lower. This was the most realistic situation. They were so close to the western region, but they went to provoke the overlord of the western region. Even if they were courting death, they would not do so. A day later, the sound of a sword suddenly split the sky above the clouds. The peaks echoed, and several figures appeared in front of everyone. Xuanyuan's reinforcements had finally arrived. Chapter 312. There was a perfected person, inner sword Yuanying Taoist Xiao Qiu. There were also 3 Jin Dan cultivators, 1 inner sword and 2 outer sword. Yanbo recounted the ins and outs of the matter in detail, including the dirty dealings between the Mountain Owl clan and the supreme cultivators. Then, they carefully examined the 2 corpses and went down to the Earth's core cave to investigate. Finally, they questioned the Wanbei clan cultivators. At this point, the 3 Foundation establishment cultivators had nothing to do. Whether it was in terms of professionalism or ability, they could not interfere. 3 days later, Taoist Xiaoqiu came to a conclusion. Guangbei had died together with the Jin Dan beasts in a battle with 2 mountain owls. The mountain owls were brought in by outsiders, not born in the Earth's core cave. The strange Dharma cultivator who attacked Yanbo outside the cave was from the 3 Pure Ones. His name was unknown. The mountain-gazing clan cultivators knew nothing about this, because their clan leader had been replaced a few years ago. This 3 Pure Dharma cultivator was very patient. He had endured here for at least 3 years for a trap. Once the conclusion was out, it made the 3 of them feel lost in their hearts, because they could not even find a specific target for revenge. The 3 Pure Ones were old rivals. It was the Dharma cultivator sect on the same level as the supreme cultivators. It was one of the 3 fulcrums of the entire 5th ring, in existence on the same level as Xianyuan. The open and covert struggles between them were always going on, and this time, it was just one of the countless killings between low-level cultivators. To the remaining 3, this might be a major event that would affect their lives. However, from the perspective of the sect and from the height of Taoist Xiaoqiu, it was not too surprising. It happened every year, not only for Xianyuan, but also for the supreme cultivators and the 3 Pure Ones. The murderer was already dead. It was not within the rules to deliberately take revenge. If the revenge was established, the one who deserved to die the most in this team was Lu Xiaoi. He had already harmed many Dharma cultivators from large sects, and at this rate, there would be more in the future. As the only 3 people left in the team, Taoist Master Dawn Autumn also encouraged them one by one. They hadn't done anything wrong. On the contrary, they had completed their mission perfectly. According to Taoist Master Dawn Autumn, they were the best team out of the 10 teams. As for losses, this was the fate of cultivators. To be honest, they weren't the only team that had suffered losses. There were even teams that had been wiped out. When it was Lu Shui's turn, Taoist Xiao stood with his hands behind his back, for a long time without speaking. Lu Xiaoi performed the disciple's etiquette. Of course, he did not take the initiative to speak. Do you think Xianyuan should take revenge? Instead of silently enduring it like this? Lu Xiaoi was very cautious. Revenge is inevitable. Haven't you been taking revenge for tens of thousands of years? Xianyuan stage Ying sure you. Taoist Xiao was very satisfied. For young cultivators, the most undesirable thing was to put too much pressure on their shoulders. They did not have the ability to carry too many things. Very good. Do you have any requests? Lu Xiaoi actually had many requests. For example, leaving Maojian town, he felt that this place was not safe anymore. For example, how would the head count reward be calculated? It could not be the pitiful 100 spirit stones anymore, right? For example, but he could not say it now. In front of senior brother Guangbei's self-sacrifice, he could not bring out these thoughts. It was too embarrassing. Too not a swordsman. I want to know if senior brother Guangbei has any last wishes. We did not look at his storage ring. I am not too clear about senior brother's past. Taoist Shao waved his hand. I know what you mean. You want to do something for Guangbei, right? No need. His inner sword sect disciples will take care of his funeral. You do not need to feel burdened by this. Guangbei is not saving anyone, but upholding Xuanyuan's tradition. Remember, if it was any other inner sword sect disciple, they would make the same choice. Of course, outer sword is the same. Can I keep senior brother's broken sword? In the small karst cave, I took the broken sword. I just wanted to keep it as a memento. A broken sword instantly stabbed in front of Lu Xiaoyi. This was a reasonable request. For foundation establishment, one could not completely control one's emotions. Taoist Shao understood this point very well. At the same time, a jade slip floated over. Take it. I found this when I was sorting out your senior brother's belongings. He left it for you. Lu Xiaoyi took the jade slip and scanned it with his divine sense. He understood the contents of the jade slip. It was actually a letter of recommendation. It could provide him with a chance to enter the inner sword fan tower. This was what his senior brother had promised him. He did not expect that before the confrontation with the demonic beast, his senior brother had not forgotten his promise to him. His eyes were somewhat dry. This was a feeling he had never felt before. In his life, he had never shed tears, and this time, he would not either. Seeing Taoist Shao continue to look at the sea of clouds, Lu Xiaoyi quietly retreated. He only heard Taoist Shao recite softly, Xuanyuan's sword of one life, blown by the wind and beaten by the rain. Like a lank dream, following the dream back to Xuanyuan. He found a place where no one was around and put away his senior brother's broken sword. He began to carefully look at the jade slip. This was a used jade slip. It was somewhat old. Perhaps it was too late to find it in a hurry. There were even other contents written in the jade slip. The jade slip was written to Guangbei's master, Taoist Gu Bo, due to the circumstances. It was concise and comprehensive. There were only a few sentences. It was basically asking for his master to help him, an outer sword disciple, obtain the qualifications to enter the inner sword sect. Esteemed master, disciple was constrained by the environment and could not be courteous. Please forgive me. Today, I have a friend who is an outer sword smoke end. His talent is very high, and he is very compatible with disciple. Esteemed master, please help him to choose a technique in the inner sword sect. It is also for the development of our Xuanyuan. Gu Bo was an inner sword of Jin Dan. He had his own status in the inner sword. In this kind of relationship that did not violate the sect rules, he was much more useful than an outer sword Jin Dan. After all, the inner sword sect was in Wenguang Peak, a secret location. This was very likely Guangbei's original recommendation channel. However, he was not confident in his battle with the Jin Dan Shan Shao. Therefore, he left a backup plan that came in handy. It made one sigh. After reading Guangbei's message a few times, there was no description of his dangerous situation. It was clear that he had a strong will. He was indeed an outstanding figure in the inner sword. Every time he read it, Lu Xiaoyi's mood calmed down a little. Until his heart was completely calm. Sadness should not be left on the surface. It must be passed as soon as possible, he told himself. There were other contents in the jade slip. They were scattered and not systematic. There were occasional reflections on swordsmanship, evaluations of people, experiences of the mountains and rivers. However, most of them were evaluations of the Fifth Ring Foundation establishment rankings. No Zhou Pu is suppressing me. We are evenly matched. However, if we fight to the death, we must cut him down. 3 pure ones, Lang Yazi, ranked in the top 10. I am no match for his instantaneous technique. I must find a breakthrough in swordsmanship, Jialan Wuji, ranked in the top 10. Peculiar Dao body. Lu Xiaoyi really did not expect that his senior brother, who had never mentioned anything about this in their 5 years together, actually placed great importance on the rankings in his heart. He also had expectations. Fish Leaping Cliff, a place where I, Guangbei, can use my sword. With one sword, who can contend against me? Let's work hard together. Fish Leaping Cliff was the holy land of the Fifth Ring Foundation establishment rankings. Only cultivators who could steadily rank in the top 10 for more than 10 years could leave their own mark on the cliff. It was also a place revered by many hot-blooded cultivators. How many heroes had left behind their glorious pasts here? Of course, it did not mean that they could successfully advance to Jindan just by occupying a spot here. It was also a kind of obsession. Lu Xiaoyi took out the broken sword. His finger lightly brushed against its frightening sharpness. After coming to the fifth ring for nearly 20 years, he had set his first goal. Don't worry, senior brother. I will fulfill your wish. Chapter 313. P.S. Monthly votes at the end of the month. Go for it. The investigation came to an end very quickly. As for the follow-up of the Wangbei tribe, there was someone from the sect to handle it, so there was no need for them to worry. After getting Daoist Zhao's approval, the three of them continued with the mission. They still had 2 Gaoshan tribe members to go. They had to persevere and complete the mission. Senior brother Guangbei would definitely not want them to give up halfway. They had to finish what they started, and the heavens did not play tricks on them anymore. In the end, the 2 Gaoshan tribe members successfully signed the contract. Yanbo said that this was senior brother Guangbei's blessing in the other world. Lu Xiaoyi did not know what Yanbo would become in the future. Like him, Yanbo buried his hatred deep in his heart. However, different people had different attitudes towards hatred. Some people would destroy themselves in hatred, while others would use it as motivation. This was something that could not be changed. It was life. The team left Wolf Ridge and the mission ended. They returned to Mao Xian town and completed a cycle. They started from here and ended here, except for one less person. Beside the stone tower, the few of them said goodbye. Yanbo had to leave first because he still had a lot of work to do. He had to report the whole incident to the sect, send the 17 contracts signed during the whole process to the sect's management department for safekeeping, and even make an evaluation of the Gaoshan tribes who were unwilling to cooperate, so as to benefit the sect's future strategy. This was a serious matter, so it could not be delayed. Before leaving, Yanbo looked at Lu Xiaoyi. I know you don't want to stay in Mao Xian town anymore. I can understand. I would do the same if it were me. What you need most now is a relatively safe and quiet environment to improve your swordsmanship. Instead of facing the endless challenges that could very well be endless. But rules are rules. When we accepted the mission, the Sword Chi Soaring Pavilion recommended you. At that time, they did not say clearly where you would go after the mission was completed. Since they did not say, you can only stay in Mao Xian town temporarily. But don't worry, I will report your excellent performance to the Sword Chi Soaring Pavilion immediately. I will also advise them through the Thunder Palace that you are no longer suitable to stay here. But this will take time. You can't run away. Before the news comes, you have to stay here. This is Xuanyuan's place. It can't be unguarded. After Yanbo finished speaking, he flew away on his sword, leaving behind Lu Xiaoyi, who curled his lips. Now that you're the eldest senior brother, the way you speak is indeed different. It was all bullshit. Mao Tip Town hadn't been guarded for 5 years, and it hadn't been taken over by the other side either. Why was it that when I came back, there couldn't be one less person? You only know how to bully honest people. First of all, there's no one guarding the place, and there's someone guarding the place, but they're not on guard. Secondly, you're not an honest person. Lu Xiaoyi ignored her teasing and asked curiously, Senior Marshal's sister, don't you miss being away for 5 years? Why didn't he leave and instead chose to stay here? Do you want to spend the rest of your life here with me because of the beautiful scenery here? Smoker was already used to his glib tongue. First of all, I didn't leave today, but that doesn't mean I won't leave tomorrow or the day after. Secondly, just because the mountains and waters were good, it did not mean that they were good as well. There's also the possibility of raising a freak. Lu Xie sighed. How could he not understand Smoker's thoughts? Actually, it was also Yan Bo's thoughts. Because of his frightening success rate in killing people, and the fact that he had a debt of blood, would there be any Dharma cultivators from the big sects who would come to seek revenge and provoke him? This wasn't a question of probability, but a question of how many and when they would come. Once the 3 Pure Ones understood the process of Xuanyuan's diplomatic mission at Langling and knew who was the one who put in the effort, they would announce it to their disciples. Without any mobilization, there would naturally be cultivators who were eager to gain merit, who dreamed of becoming famous, who had family and friends, and all kinds of cultivators who came with different intentions. There was no need for the sect to make arrangements, because this wasn't a battle between cultivators. As long as it was announced, there would naturally be people who would step forward bravely. Would Xianyuan help his disciples to hide? Of course not. To the Xianyuan swordsmen, this was the situation they liked to see the most. Countless Dharma cultivators would come to practice their skills and satisfy the swordsman's desire to battle. Of course, the swordsman would also send helpers, and in the end, it would become a long and drawn-out killing feast. However, Lu Xiaoyi's situation was slightly different. He hadn't fully matured yet, and was at the stage where he needed protection. If it were someone else, like Guang Bei or even Yan Bo, the sect wouldn't care and take care of them themselves. However, Lu Xiaoyi obviously didn't belong to this situation. Yan Bo stayed here because he was afraid that Lu Xiaoyi would be alone, so he wanted to stay here for a while and wait for the sect's reply. It was like an old mother hen who wanted to protect a troublesome little rooster, but didn't know that the little rooster's fighting strength had already surpassed her. Lu Xiaoyi wanted to say, I can actually take care of myself. If you're not here, I can hide and reduce the time I have to show my face in front of others. If you're here, I'll go and save you instead. However, he couldn't say that, because it was too hurtful. Fortunately, there was still time. The truth of their trip to Wolf's Ridge wouldn't be spread out immediately. Once it was spread out, it would slowly spread until someone came to find trouble with them. This would take years. By that time, Yan Bo would have already received the news, right? Life returned to normal. Senior sister Yan Bo appeared and disappeared mysteriously, and he couldn't figure out her whereabouts. He was too lazy to care about her, and only cared about his own life. Now, he had to face a new situation. Hidden Fragrance had given birth to a sword spirit. This was good news, because it meant that his swordsmanship system was finally starting to take shape. The 4 seasons would patrol with speed, Ju City would break through with strength, and Hidden Fragrance would launch sneak attacks. However, it was also bad news. He was going to have to spend a lot of money again. There were many places where he needed spirit stones. The 4 seasons in Ju City would be upgraded soon, and Hidden Fragrance's entire body would be engraved into a sword array. After that, he would need to refine a flying sword, ready to stab living creatures at any time. Right now, he only had 500 mid-grade spirit stones on him, which were obtained from selling the sex skills to Yan Bo. There was also the salary he received in advance from Gu Gang. As for the rest, he could only see how much reward he could get from this mission. And there were still 2 heads, so he couldn't sell them at a cheap price. In fact, he didn't expect to have many flying swords with sword spirits in the future. Main attack, sneak attack, roundabout, backup, he estimated that he wouldn't even need 10 of them. If he had more, it would be troublesome to control them. He was very clear that no matter how many flying swords he trained, they couldn't compare to the endless inner sword. Therefore, his main goal was still to improve the individual ability of his single sword. If in the future, he could break through the enemy with one sword in Ju City, then why would he need to train other flying swords? In order to fulfill Guangbei's wish, his future days couldn't be too dull. In fact, he could see that even without Guangbei, he was destined to not be dull. He didn't look for trouble, but trouble always came to him. He didn't know what was going on. Half a month later, Yanbo brought him news of the dome. Chapter 3:14. Sword Chi Soaring Heaven Pavilion's orders are for you to continue guarding Spear Point Town. Yanqing didn't bring any good news, but Lu Xiaoyi already had a premonition that fate wouldn't allow him to hide in the sect and live a peaceful life. It always wanted to torment him, so it didn't matter. Yanqing was puzzled by his indifference. You're not angry? Lu Xiaoyi sighed. What's the use of being angry? Senior apprentice sister, if I take root here, do you plan to stay here forever? If that's the case, why don't we merge our two sects into one, and roll our covers together? Yanqing said. You've only had a few days, and now you're talking nonsense again. I told you the bad news just now, but now I'm going to tell you the good news. Lu Xiaoyi lay lazily outside the stone pagoda, basking in the sun. It's already like this, what good news can there be? It must be another piece of bad news. Senior apprentice sister, you're purposely angering me. Yanqing chuckled. The news I received from the sect today is the latest. It's about you, do you want to know? Lu Xiaoyi was very dissatisfied. The stone pagoda is with me, right? Why didn't they give me the news directly? Instead, they use you, senior apprentice sister, such an informal channel. The sect is too biased. Yanqing glanced at him. I have friends. Do you? Lu Xiaoyi was speechless. He really didn't. As for Yanqing's group, they were just casual acquaintances. Moreover, their levels were limited, so he didn't know much inside information. However, he didn't want to lose face. You call them friends? They're all subordinates under your skirt, right? For women, you don't care about the sex rules. Yanqing wasn't angry, because what she was about to say really made her happy. Little E, I want to congratulate you here. According to the Sex News, the Five-Ring Foundation establishment ranking list that is held every 3 years was updated a few days ago. Our Xianyuan external sword has another person on the list. Don't you think it's something worth celebrating? What does it have to do with me? Lu Xiaoyi subconsciously expressed his disdain, but quickly sat up. Senior apprentice sister, no. Smokey smiled like a flower. Really? Congratulations, junior marshal brother. In the new ranking, junior marshal brother is ranked 9th and 9th. Junior marshal brother has successfully entered the foundation building ranking. Junior marshal brother has become the pride of Xianyuan, the pride of the external sword sect, and a powerhouse respected by your peers. I hope Junior Marshal Brother will continue to work hard and make further progress. Lu Xiaoyi had to interrupt him. Wait. My mind is in a mess. Who was the one behind this ranking? Don't I need to register? Announcing it out of the blue like this, where was the privacy of others? Is there still law and order? Smokey could not suppress his laughter, but it was obvious that he was up to no good. Since you're in the cultivation world, unless you never leave the mountain and never fight with others, your every move must have been collated behind your back. You killed people in Min State Prefecture, River City, the Red Top Clan, the Mountain Python Clan, and the North Gazing Clan. With so many achievements, how could they have missed you? This is the Five-Ring cultivation world. Whether you enter the ranking or not is not up to you. Even your nickname is not up to you. Lu Xiaoyi was very vigilant. His Dharma name was terrible, so he still cared about such nicknames. He did not ask for too many, but it should be similar, right? Nickname? What does that mean? Who gave them the right to give me a nickname? Smokey finally could not hold back his laughter. What right do you have? Did you have a right when you were born? It was your parents who gave you the name. Did you have a right when you entered the sect? It was the sect who gave you the name. Then when it comes to the ranking, what right do you have? The 5-ring foundation building ranking only selects the top 1,000. So you're just a shortlist. There's a lot of room for improvement. Come, I'll read it for you. Number 1000, Orchid Court Cultivator, Shining Night Meteor Lin Zijing. Number 998, Tai Immortal Sect Cultivator, 9 Heavens Lightning Emperor. Listen, this nickname, this aura, this charm, this realm. Lu Xiaoyi finally realized how scary this woman was and hurriedly stopped her. Wait. Senior Martial Sister, what's the use of reading these irrelevant names? Read out the 999th name. Smokey finally stopped laughing and said seriously, Okay, I'll read out the 999th name. Xianyuan Sword Sex External Sword Lineage, Candide Hawes Lu Xiaoyi. After saying that, she could no longer hold back and laughed while covering her sleeves. Lu Xiaoyi stared blankly for a moment, then flew into a rage. Which mischievous bastard is this, to randomly give this young master a nickname? It doesn't match the facts at all. It's all groundless and fabricated. Smokey finally stopped laughing. Groundless accusations? I don't think so, right? I feel that the nickname that other people came up with for you is a good portrayal of you. Did you not lick the Candide Hawes after killing people in the Mountain Python tribe? What did you chew after killing people in the North Gazing tribe? They didn't accuse you wrongly. Lu Xiaoyi was very dissatisfied. It's just a habit. It doesn't represent the characteristics of one's strength. Look at Tai Immortal Sect. They play with lightning, so they call them 9 Heavens Lightning. That's very suitable. I play with swords, so I have to be related to swords, right? Even if you don't touch swords, I'm a star cultivator. It's fine to have 100 changes Star Lord or something. Candide Hawes? What is this? Do you want me to pierce through 8 or 10 heads with one sword? Smokey's laughter gradually disappeared. This junior brother's last sentence was obviously a joke, but for some reason, she felt that it was very likely to become a reality. It was very scary, she sighed softly. Little E, the nickname has been set. It can't be changed. But your habit of licking the Candide Hawes after killing people is indeed a little perverted. Lu Xiaoyi felt very wronged. I don't want either. I faint at the sight of blood. It can have a little sour and sweet taste in my mouth, and it can be suppressed a little. Smokey was very serious. Little E, this joke can only be made between us martial brothers and sisters, but you must not lick the Candide Hawes after killing people outside and then say that you faint at the sight of blood. This was contempt, a blatant provocation. When others hear you say this, they will have a common enemy and fight you to the death. Lu Xiaoyi wanted to cry, but no tears came out. Wasn't this forcing him to not tell the truth and only tell lies? This was forcing a good girl to become a prostitute. With great difficulty, Lu Xiaoyi bypassed this point. He still had a lot of questions. Senior sister, is there a reward for being on the ranking list? Yes. But it's not from the sect, it's from other sects. There will always be people challenging you at any time, and you can't refuse. Can I hide in the dome? No. They directly challenge you in front of the mountain gate. For the glory of the sword vein, you can't refuse. Then what's the point of playing? If the first-ranked person challenges me, won't I die without a burial place? I can't hide, can't run? If it's like this, won't there be only one person left alive in the ranking list? Lu Xiaoyi really wanted to fulfill senior brother Guangbei's wish, but not now. In any case, he should at least give him a few decades to strengthen himself, right? Now that he was suddenly pulled into it, what should he do? Their cultivation levels were not equal at all. You're tuning into the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.